The TCS Lexington had been 3 days into patrol when the anomaly appeared on Blair's sensors. Not a jump point, he'd navigated hundreds of those during the Kilrathi War, but something else entirely. Energy readings spiked across spectrums his fighter's computer couldn't classify, emanating from coordinates that shouldn't exist in real space. Standard protocol demanded he report it. Combat instinct told him to investigate. Colonel Christopher Blair banked his fighter toward the disturbance, thumb hovering over the comm activation. Lexington Actual, this is Maverick. I've got an unidentified energy signature at NAV point Delta 7. Recommend. The cockpit flooded with light. His Excalibur fighter shuddered as reality bent around him. Not a jump point transition, those were familiar, almost comfortable after years of service. This was something else. His instruments screamed warnings in languages his computer suddenly couldn't translate. The stars twisted, elongated, and then nothing. When his vision cleared, Christopher Blair was staring at a planet that wasn't in any navigation database he'd ever accessed. Blue and white, familiar continental patterns, but impossible. His fighter drifted in high orbit while every system ran diagnostic checks, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Lexington, do you copy? Static answered him. Any confeed vessel, this is Colonel Blair, TCS Lexington Wing. Requesting navigation assistance and status report. His comm crackled. Not with static this time, but with a voice. Clear, professional, unmistakably military, and speaking English with an accent he hadn't heard since before the Kilrathi burned through the Vega sector. Unidentified craft, this is NORAD Aerospace Defense Command. You are in restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately and prepare to be intercepted. Blair's hand moved to his weapon systems instinctively, but he forced it back to the throttle. NORAD. North American Aerospace Defense Command. That was Earth. Ancient Earth, before the Confederation, before humanity had even reached the stars. But his sensors told him he was orbiting Earth, contemporary Earth, with satellites and orbital platforms his computer flagged as primitive but functional. NORAD, this is Colonel Christopher Blair, Terran Confederation Space Force. He kept his voice steady, professional. Whatever had happened, however impossible this situation was, he was still a pilot and they were still military. I've experienced a navigational incident and require assistance determining my current position. The pause lasted 3 heartbeats. Colonel Blair, maintain your current orbit and do not deviate. You are being tracked by multiple defense platforms. Any aggressive action will be met with appropriate response. A recovery team is being scrambled. Blair checked his fuel status. Enough for 3 hours of maneuvering, maybe 4 if he went to minimum power. His weapons were fully armed. Mass drivers, missiles, the full loadout he'd taken for what was supposed to be a routine patrol. But something in that voice told him these people weren't the enemy. They were confused, possibly frightened, definitely military, and he knew exactly how he'd react if an unknown fighter appeared in friendly space. Understood, NORAD. I'm shutting down weapons systems and holding position. His hands moved across the familiar controls, safing his armament. For what it's worth, I'm just as confused as you are about how I got here. Copy that, Colonel. Stay on this frequency. And Colonel? The voice softened slightly. Welcome to Earth. Through his cockpit, Blair watched as a ring-shaped platform powered up 3,000 kilometers below. Energy cascaded across its surface in patterns that made his fighter's sensors spike again, the same readings as the anomaly that had brought him here. A wormhole erupted from the ring's center, a vertical pool of shimmering energy that violated every law of physics he understood, and something emerged. Not a fighter. Not anything he recognized. But definitely a ship, and definitely heading his way. Whatever had happened, wherever, or whenever, he was, Christopher Blair had just entered a war he hadn't known existed. The question was whether his experience fighting one alien empire would be enough to survive in a universe where, he was beginning to suspect, humanity faced threats that made the Kilrathi look like a minor skirmish. His fighter drifted in orbit above Earth, and Colonel Christopher Blair waited to discover what kind of war he'd just been drafted into. 3 hours later, Blair sat in a briefing room 28 levels beneath Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado, and tried to process information that rewrote everything he thought he understood about human history. The woman across the table, Major Samantha Carter, astrophysicist and USAF officer, had just finished explaining that the ring he'd seen was called a Stargate. That it connected to thousands of other gates across the galaxy. That an ancient race called the Alterans had built them millions of years ago. That humanity's entire history had been shaped by parasitic aliens called the Goa'uld who'd masqueraded as gods and enslaved humans across the stars. Blair had fought aliens for years. He'd seen the Kilrathi Empire burn worlds, had lost friends and comrades to their claws and honor-bound warfare. But this was something else entirely. So let me make sure I understand, he said, keeping his voice level despite the unreality of it all. These Goa'uld, snake-like parasites, take human hosts, pretend to be gods from Earth mythology, and have been using the Stargate network to build an interstellar empire based on enslaving other humans? That's the simplified version, Carter confirmed. She'd been watching him with a scientist's curiosity since they'd brought him down from orbit. His fighter was currently in a hangar somewhere in this facility, being examined by engineers who probably thought his mass driver technology was quaint. Though the situation's more complex. Some Goa'uld oppose the system lords, they're called Tok'ra. We've got allies. And the Goa'uld threat has been declining over the past few years due to internal conflicts. But there's a new player. This came from the man at the head of the table, General Hammond, SGC commander. He had the bearing of someone who'd seen too much but still carried the weight without complaint. Anubis. A Goa'uld who was banished by the system lords for crimes even they considered excessive. He's returned with technology that surpasses anything we've encountered, ancient technology. And he's building a fleet that threatens Earth directly. Blair leaned back in his chair. In the Kilrathi War, the strategic situation had at least made sense. 2 powers, clear battle lines, jump points that dictated engagement zones. This Stargate universe operated on entirely different rules. Instant transportation across the galaxy. Ancient super technology waiting to be discovered. False gods with real power leading fleets of enslaved warriors. But at its core, it was still war. And war, Blair understood. My fighter, he said. You've had 3 hours to look at it. What's the assessment? Carter exchanged a glance with the 4th person in the room, Colonel Jack O'Neill, leader of SG-1 and the man who'd personally escorted Blair down from the gate room after his retrieval. O'Neill had the look of a special forces operator, all dry humor covering steel underneath. Advanced, Carter admitted. Your mass driver technology is actually more efficient than our railgun prototypes. The maneuvering thrusters use a propulsion system we haven't seen before. And your fighter's computer architecture is about 30 years ahead of our current tech, though in completely different developmental directions. But? Blair prompted. But you're out of fuel for those thrusters, you've got ammunition for maybe one engagement, and your jump drive technology doesn't interface with anything in this universe. O'Neill's voice was blunt but not unkind. Whatever brought you here, Colonel, your fighter's now a very expensive museum piece unless we can adapt it to our technology base. Blair had suspected as much. He'd checked his systems thoroughly during the wait for retrieval. The jump drive showed 0 navigation points, as if the entire mapped Confederation network simply didn't exist. His fuel cells read normal capacity, but whatever refining process created that fuel probably didn't exist here either. Show me what you've got, he said. Your space combat capabilities. If Anubis is building a fleet and threatening Earth, you must have countermeasures beyond the Stargate's iris. Hammond nodded slowly. Major Carter, briefed Colonel Blair on the Prometheus and F-302 programs. What followed was simultaneously impressive and concerning. This Earth, had reverse-engineered alien technology at a remarkable pace. The BC-303 Prometheus was humanity's first capital ship, currently under construction in orbit. The F-302 was a space-capable fighter using a hybrid of human and Goa'uld technology, still in testing phases. But Blair could see the gaps immediately. These people were brilliant engineers working with stolen alien tech, trying to build a space combat force from scratch. They had the pieces but not the doctrine. No carrier operations experience. No tactical framework for fighter wing deployment. No one who'd actually fought a sustained space war. Your F-302, Blair said carefully. What's the tactical deployment strategy? Carrier-based? Station defense? Independent patrol? Carter hesitated. We're still developing operational doctrine. The prototypes have been tested primarily in gate-based missions, dialing to orbital gates, engaging death gliders in planetary defense scenarios. Death gliders being Goa'uld fighters? Correct. Two-man craft, energy weapons, decent maneuverability but vulnerable to concentrated fire. Blair processed that. It was a start, but these people were thinking in terms of ground-based tactics adapted to space. No one had taught them carrier operations. No one had shown them how to coordinate fighter wings against capital ships. No one had experience with the brutal mathematics of space combat where fuel, ammunition, and positioning determined survival. General Hammond, Blair said, meeting the commander's eyes. I don't know how I got here. I don't know if I can get back to my own universe. But I do know war against an alien empire. I've flown combat missions against the Kilrathi for years. Species that enslaved and destroyed human worlds, that fought with honor codes we barely understood, that nearly won before we adapted our tactics. He leaned forward. You're building a space force from the ground up. You need someone who's actually fought this kind of war. Someone who knows carrier doctrine, fighter tactics, and how to coordinate wings against superior numbers. He paused. I'm not asking for command. I'm not asking to take over your programs. But I'm offering experience you don't have and knowledge that might keep your pilots alive when Anubis comes calling. The room fell silent. Blair could see the calculation in Hammond's eyes, the assessment. Unknown pilot from impossible origin, claiming experience in a war that might or might not exist in any universe they could verify. But also combat ace with documented skills, sitting in a facility where Earth was desperately trying to build space defenses against an enemy that outgunned them by orders of magnitude. O'Neill broke the silence with characteristic bluntness. Can you fly our fighters? Show me the cockpit and give me 2 hours. If the controls are anything like standard spacecraft, yes. Can you teach our pilots what you know? Blair thought of the dozens of rookie pilots he'd trained during the war. The ones who'd survived had learned quickly. The ones who hadn't. I can teach them. Whether they learn fast enough depends on how much time we have before Anubis attacks. Hammond stood. Colonel Blair, until we determine your origin and situation, you're a guest of Stargate Command under military custody. However, he extended his hand. If you're willing to assist with our F-302 program and share your tactical expertise, I'm willing to extend temporary commission status and access to our space combat development projects. Blair stood and shook the general's hand. I appreciate that, sir. Though I should mention. In my experience, when you're facing an alien empire with superior numbers and technology, temporary has a way of becoming permanent. O'Neill snorted. Yeah, that sounds about right for this place. One more thing, Blair added. My fighter. Even if we can't make the jump drive work, the computer has complete tactical databases from the Kilrathi War. Engagement records, combat analysis, carrier operations manuals. If Major Carter can access those files, your engineers would have 20 years of space combat doctrine to work from. Carter's eyes lit up with scientific interest. We could cross-reference your tactical data with our observations of Goa'uld fleet movements. Adapt proven strategies to local conditions. Do it, Hammond ordered. Major, coordinate with Colonel Blair on data extraction. Colonel O'Neill, arrange quarters and security clearance. And someone get our fighter pilot here a look at the F-302 prototypes. Yes, sir. O'Neill gestured toward the door. Come on, Maverick. Let me show you what passes for a space fighter in this reality. Fair warning, it's basically a death trap that occasionally doesn't explode. Sounds like my first week in the Hornet simulator, Blair replied, following the colonel out. Behind them, Carter was already pulling up specifications on her laptop, mind clearly racing with possibilities. Hammond watched them go, then keyed his comm. This is Hammond. Get me the Tok'ra. I want to know if they have any records of dimensional or temporal displacement events involving human fighter craft. And contact Prometheus Construction Command. Tell them we're sending up a consultant who might actually know what he's doing. In orbit above Earth, Blair's Excalibur fighter sat in a hangar bay, surrounded by engineers who were discovering that sometimes the best technology wasn't always alien. And in a universe where stargates connected thousands of worlds, where ancient races had ascended to higher planes, and where false gods commanded fleets of pyramid ships, Colonel Christopher Blair prepared to teach Earth's defenders that the sky wasn't the limit, it was just the beginning. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Indeed. 3,000 light-years away, aboard the flagship of Anubis's fleet, sensors detected an anomaly. A fighter craft with unknown energy signature had appeared in Earth's orbit. The reading suggested technology that didn't match known Goa'uld, Asgard, or ancient designs. Anubis, half-ascended and half-mad with accumulated power, studied the data through his host's eyes. Another variable in an equation that was supposed to be simple. Another potential threat to his plans for Earth and the ancient weapons platform in Antarctica. He would need to accelerate his timeline. The war Christopher Blair thought he'd been drafted into was about to escalate in ways even a veteran of the Kilrathi campaigns couldn't predict. But in a universe where ring-shaped portals connected the stars, where some pilots were beginning to learn that the old ways of war still mattered, one combat ace was about to prove that experience fighting one alien empire was exactly the preparation needed for another. The Stargate hummed in its mountain fortress, ready to dial 1,000 destinations. And somewhere in the facility's depths, a fighter pilot from another universe began learning the addresses that would take him to war among the stars. The F-302 prototype sat in Hangar 2B like a promise half-kept. Blair circled it slowly, hands clasped behind his back, assessing every line and curve with a pilot's trained eye. The craft was smaller than his Excalibur, more angular, with a design philosophy that screamed, reverse-engineered alien tech merged with human desperation. Aerospike engines for atmospheric flight, Carter explained, following him around the fighter. She'd traded the briefing room for the hangar with clear relief. This was her element, surrounded by machinery and physics problems with definable solutions. Naquadah-enhanced nuclear reactors provide power. The weapons are modified Goa'uld staff cannons, energy weapons instead of your mass drivers, plus AIM-120 air-to-air missiles for atmospheric combat and rail guns for space engagements. Blair stopped at the cockpit, peering through the canopy. The instrument layout looked functional but cramped, too many systems competing for attention. How many test flights? 17 successful atmospheric flights. 9 orbital insertions. 3 combat engagements against death gliders. Carter paused. 2 pilots killed in the 3rd engagement. Glider shields absorbed more punishment than we'd calculated, and the pilots got drawn into close-range dogfights where the Goa'uld's numerical advantage overwhelmed them. Let me guess, your pilots came from atmospheric fighter backgrounds. F-15, F-16, maybe some F-22 experience. Blair ran his hand along the fighter's hull, feeling the alien-human hybrid construction. They flew it like it was a jet with a rocket booster. That's actually exactly what happened. Carter pulled up a tablet, displaying combat footage. How did you know? Because I made the same mistake my first month in space combat. Blair watched the grainy video of F-302s engaging death gliders in orbit above some unknown planet. The Earth pilots flew with skill and aggression, but their tactics were pure atmospheric dogfighting, turn rates, energy management, angles of attack that meant everything in air combat and almost nothing in space. In atmosphere, physics limits your options. Gravity, drag, lift, you work within those boundaries. In space, you have freedom of movement in all three dimensions, but you also have momentum that doesn't stop just because you turn off the engine. He pointed at the screen where an F-302 executed a sharp turn, bleeding velocity to get inside a death glider's arc. That pilot just killed himself. He's thinking in terms of getting inside the turn, reducing his turn radius. But in space, that just makes him predictable. The glider can see his vector, calculate his position 3 seconds ahead, and put energy weapons right where he's going to be. Carter studied the footage with new eyes. So how do you compensate? You stop thinking like you're flying through air and start thinking like you're operating in three-dimensional space with Newtonian physics. Blair turned back to the F-302. Can I sit in the cockpit? Be my guest. The cockpit access ladder was standard enough. Blair climbed up and lowered himself into the pilot's seat, immediately cataloging the differences from his Excalibur. The stick felt wrong, too light, oversensitive. The throttle positioning would take adjustment. But the HUD display was actually superior in some ways, and the weapons interface looked intuitive once you understood the logic. Your engineers did remarkable work, he called down to Carter. This is 3 generations of technology compressed into 5 years of development. In the Confederation, we had the benefit of gradual advancement. You're trying to skip straight to the end result. We don't have the luxury of gradual advancement. O'Neill had appeared in the hangar entrance, accompanied by a younger man in pilot's gear. Colonel Blair, meet Major Evan Mitchell. He's one of our test pilots for the 302 program and, as of yesterday, has more space combat hours than any other Earth pilot still breathing. Mitchell approached with the cautious confidence of someone who'd survived what killed others. He was young, maybe late 20s, with the reflexes and swagger that marked every fighter jock Blair had ever trained. Colonel. Heard you flew something that makes our bird look like a crop duster. Different technology, same principles. Blair climbed down from the cockpit. Major Carter tells me you lost 2 pilots in your last engagement. Want to tell me what happened? Mitchell's jaw tightened. The reaction of someone who'd survived when friends hadn't. We were escorting a cargo ship through orbit around P3X 774. 6 death gliders came through the gate and engaged. We had 4 302s. Should have been even odds, maybe slight advantage to us given our rail gun range. But, he trailed off. But you got into a turning fight, Blair finished. And once you committed to close-range maneuvering combat, the glider's numerical advantage and their pilot's experience in zero-G combat gave them the edge. Captain Reynolds and Lieutenant Chen held their positions while Mitchell and Davis broke to engage. Carter pulled up the tactical overlay on her tablet. They destroyed 3 gliders but lost both pilots in the process. Mitchell and Davis were forced to retreat. Blair studied the tactical data, seeing the mission unfold in his mind. You did the right thing, Major. You broke to engage and kept them off the cargo ship. Reynolds and Chen made the hard call. Holding position meant they became stationary targets, but if they'd maneuvered, the gliders would have gotten past them to the objective. Mitchell's shoulders relaxed fractionally. Captain Reynolds was my friend. We went through flight school together. Then honor him by learning from what happened. Blair's voice was firm but not unkind. He'd had this conversation too many times during the war. In the Kilrathi War, we had a saying. The first 3 months of combat determine whether you become an ace or a casualty. Not because of skill or reflexes, but because you have to unlearn everything that kept you alive in atmospheric combat and rebuild your tactical thinking from scratch. So teach me. Mitchell's eyes hardened with determination. Teach me how to keep the rest of my squadron alive. Blair glanced at O'Neill, who nodded. General Hammond gave me authorization to run tactical simulations with our pilots. We've got a modified flight simulator that can replicate space combat conditions. Not perfect, but better than nothing. How long until Anubis moves against Earth? Blair asked. Unknown. O'Neill's expression darkened. Intelligence suggests he's building something big. Superweapon, new fleet, some ancient technology we haven't identified yet. Could be weeks, could be months. The Tok'ra are trying to get assets close enough for reconnaissance, but Anubis knows how to keep secrets. Then we don't have time for gradual training. Blair turned back to Mitchell. Get your squadron. Everyone who's certified on the 302. We're going to run combat simulations until your instincts catch up with the reality of space warfare. How many simulations are we talking about? Mitchell asked. As many as it takes. In the Confederation, we ran rookies through 100 simulator hours before their first combat deployment. You don't have that luxury, you're already in combat. So we compressed the learning curve. Blair's expression was grim. Some of you won't adapt fast enough. That's the brutal truth. But the ones who do will have a fighting chance when the real engagement comes. Carter was already pulling up simulation parameters on her tablet. I can program the simulator to replicate Death Glider performance characteristics. We have enough combat data from previous engagements to create realistic scenarios. Make them harder than realistic, Blair instructed. If they can survive impossible odds in simulation, actual combat becomes manageable. And add variables, equipment failures, communications disruptions, friendly fire risks. War is messy. Your simulator needs to reflect that. O'Neill studied Blair with open assessment. You know, when General Hammond said we were getting a consultant, I was expecting someone to tell us our fighters needed better cup holders. This is, actually useful. I spent 10 years fighting the Kilrathi, Colonel. Lost a lot of friends learning lessons that should have been obvious. If I can compress that learning curve for your pilots, maybe some of them survive long enough to become the veterans who train the next generation. Blair paused. That's how you build a space force, not just with technology, but with institutional knowledge passed from survivors to rookies. The Kilrathi, Carter said thoughtfully. In your universe, humanity fought an alien empire. What were they like? Tactically, I mean. Blair considered the question. Honor-bound warriors. Feline species with a rigid clan structure. They valued glory in combat above survival, which made them dangerous. They'd take risks we wouldn't, press attacks when rational tactics demanded retreat. But it also made them predictable once you understood their psychology. He gestured to the F-302. The Goa'uld sound different. False gods using human hosts, commanding enslaved soldiers. That's a completely different command structure. The Jaffa, their primary warriors, are trained from childhood to revere the Goa'uld as gods, O'Neill explained. But they're not mindless. Some are brilliant tacticians. And more of them are starting to question the whole gods thing, especially after TLC's rebellion. TLC. He's a Jaffa. Former First Prime, highest-ranking warrior, of the Goa'uld Apophis. He joined SG-1 5 years ago and has been helping us fight the system lords ever since. O'Neill's voice carried respect. Big guy, gold emblem on his forehead, says, indeed, more than any person should. You'll meet him. Blair filed that information away. A defector from the enemy's command structure would be invaluable for understanding Goa'uld tactical doctrine. I'd like to talk with him. Understanding how the enemy trains their pilots, or doesn't, could give us exploitable advantages. Most Goa'uld motherships are flown by Jaffa who've trained for decades, Carter added. But Death Glider pilots are often younger warriors. Less experienced, but still dangerous in numbers. Numbers we can work with. Blair's mind was already running tactical scenarios. Superior positioning, longer-range weapons, coordinated fire control, these are force multipliers that compensate for numerical disadvantage. The question is whether your fighters and pilots can execute the doctrine. Only one way to find out. Mitchell cracked his knuckles. When do we start? Now. Blair checked his watch. He'd been on Earth for exactly 6 hours and was already diving into combat training. Different universe, same war. Major, get your squadron to the simulator bay. We're going to start with basic spatial maneuvering and work up to multi-fighter tactical coordination. On it. Mitchell jogged toward the hangar exit, already keying his radio. O'Neill waited until the pilot was gone before speaking. You know, most people who drop out of nowhere into our lap spend at least a day freaking out about Stargates and aliens and the complete restructuring of everything they thought they knew about reality. I spent the Kilrathi War watching aliens burn human colonies, Blair replied quietly. When you told me about the Goa'uld enslaving humanity across the galaxy, it wasn't shock, it was recognition. Different names, different technology, same essential evil. He looked at the F-302 again. The only difference is whether I'm fighting it in my universe or yours. And you're just, okay with that? With being stuck here? Blair was silent for a moment. I'm not stuck, Colonel. I'm deployed. There's a difference. Stuck implies you're waiting for extraction. Deployed means you're operational. He met O'Neill's eyes. Maybe I'll find a way home. Maybe whatever brought me here can take me back. But until then, you've got an alien empire threatening Earth, pilots who need training, and a space combat program that needs someone who's actually fought this kind of war. So yes, I'm okay with it. Because the alternative is watching people die when I might have prevented it. O'Neill studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, you'll fit in here just fine. He gestured toward the exit. Come on. Let's go watch you terrify some rookie space pilots with impossible scenarios. It'll be therapeutic. As they walked toward the simulator bay, Carter fell into step beside them, tablet already displaying training scenarios. Colonel Blair, I've been thinking about your fighter's computer database. If we can extract the tactical files, we could also look at your ship's weapon systems architecture. Those mass drivers might be adaptable to our technology base, more efficient than rail guns for certain applications. The computer's in my native language and uses Confederation military encryption, Blair warned. But if you can crack it, the data's yours. Everything from basic flight mechanics to advanced capital ship engagement doctrine. Challenge accepted. Carter's smile was pure scientific determination. Give me 48 hours. They entered the simulator bay where Mitchell was already gathering his squadron, 8 pilots, all looking simultaneously eager and exhausted. These were the survivors, Blair realized. The ones who'd lived through the learning curve's brutal opening phase. Now he just had to make sure they lived through the next phase. All right, people, he called out, his voice carrying the authority of a combat veteran. My name is Colonel Christopher Blair. I've spent the last 10 years flying combat missions against an alien empire in a different universe. Your commanding officers have asked me to share what I know about not dying in space combat. So here's lesson 1, everything you learned in atmospheric flight school is either wrong or incomplete for space warfare. We're going to fix that, starting now. He pulled up a tactical display showing a simple scenario, 2 fighters versus 4 opponents in open space. Who wants to tell me how they'd approach this engagement? The education of Earth's first true space combat pilots had begun. And somewhere in orbit, the BC-303 Prometheus continued its construction, unaware that the consultant about to revolutionize its fighter doctrine had arrived from a universe away. In the gate room, the Stargate sat silent, its chevrons dark. But in countless realities, in infinite variations of possibility, rings connected worlds and warriors found their battlefields. Christopher Blair had found his. Now he just had to survive it. The simulator bay had become Blair's temporary office, war room, and classroom over the next 72 hours. Mitchell's squadron, callsigns Reaper, Joker, Nomad, Shadow, Viper, Ghost, Havoc, and their squadron leader himself using Boomer, had run 43 combat scenarios. They'd died in 38 of them. But they were learning. Viper, you're drifting again. Blair's voice cut through the comm channel as he watched the simulation unfold from the observation deck. On the main display, 6 F-302 fighters engaged 12 death gliders in orbit above a simulated planet. You're thinking in terms of maintaining formation altitude. There is no altitude in space. Maintain relative position to your wingman based on threat vectors, not arbitrary horizontal planes. Copy, adjusting. Viper's fighter, represented by a blue icon on the tactical display, shifted position, moving below and behind Mitchell's lead craft to cover his 6 o'clock approach vector. Better. Nomad, why are you accelerating into that turn? Trying to tighten my arc, sir. Nomad's voice was strained with concentration. Wrong. In space, acceleration doesn't tighten your arc, it extends it. You want to tighten your approach, you kill velocity and use maneuvering thrusters for directional change. Watch your delta V budget. Blair highlighted Nomad's trajectory on the display. See where you are versus where you wanted to be. You just overshot by 2,000 kilometers because you're still thinking like you're fighting air resistance. The simulation continued. Mitchell's element had learned the hard way to use rail gun range advantage, engaging the gliders at distances where energy weapons couldn't effectively return fire. Havoc and Ghost had finally internalized three-dimensional threat assessment, covering approach vectors above and below the engagement plane. Shadow and Joker were getting better at coordinated fire, concentrating on single targets to overwhelm Goa'uld shields instead of spreading damage across multiple enemies. They still died, but now it took the simulated gliders 4 minutes instead of 90 seconds. Progress. Simulation terminated. Blair killed the scenario just as Reaper's fighter took a staff cannon blast through the cockpit. Debrief in 5. Good work, people. The pilots emerged from their simulator pods looking like they'd actually flown combat missions, sweat-soaked, exhausted, mentally drained. Carter had warned Blair that the simulator's neural interface created psychological stress almost identical to real combat. Apparently, the Goa'uld technology they'd reverse-engineered for training purposes didn't distinguish between simulated danger and actual threat. 43 runs, Mitchell said, stripping off his flight gloves as he approached Blair's station. 38 losses. I'm starting to think you're trying to kill us, Colonel. If I wanted you dead, Major, I'd send you into combat with your previous tactical doctrine and let the gliders do the work. Blair pulled up the mission statistics on his tablet. But look at your survival times. First simulation, your squadron lasted an average of 90 seconds. Last 5 simulations, you've been averaging 4 minutes before catastrophic losses. That's a 200% improvement in 3 days. 4 minutes is still pretty catastrophic, Joker muttered. The pilot was young, maybe 24, with the reflexes of a natural-born fighter jock and the overconfidence that came with surviving longer than his peers. 4 minutes in combat is an eternity. Blair's voice carried the weight of experience. That's time to assess threats, coordinate with your wingmen, execute complex maneuvers, or disengage if the tactical situation deteriorates. First week of the Kilrathi War, rookie pilots were dying in 30 seconds because they panicked. The ones who survived learn to think through the fear, to process information while someone's trying to kill them. That's what you're learning. He brought up the engagement footage, highlighting specific moments. Viper, you're still overcompensating on your maneuvering thrusts. Smooth inputs, not jerky corrections. Nomad, your situational awareness improved, you caught that glider on Shadow 6 and took him out before he could fire. Good kill. He paused on a frame showing Mitchell's fighter executing a complex spiral approach. Boomer, that was textbook. You maintain optimal firing solution while presenting minimal target profile. That's exactly the kind of spatial thinking I'm trying to instill. Felt wrong, Mitchell admitted. Every instinct said to level out and approach on a flat trajectory. That's your atmospheric training talking. Ignore it. In space, the shortest path to a target isn't a straight line. It's the path that minimizes your exposure while maximizing your weapon's advantage. Blair closed the footage. All right, people. Take 30 minutes. Hydrate, eat something, and be back here for advanced scenarios. We're moving to capital ship assault tactics. The pilots filed out, their exhaustion tempered by the first hints of confidence. They were beginning to understand the three-dimensional battlefield, beginning to think like space combat operators instead of jet jockeys with rocket boosters. Carter approached as the simulator bay emptied. Impressive progress. At this rate, they'll be ready for combat operations within the week. They'll be ready for basic combat operations, Blair corrected. There's a difference between not dying immediately and actually winning engagements. That takes months of experience, dozens of missions, the kind of muscle memory you can't simulate. He looked at the Major. How's the data extraction coming? 40% complete. Your fighter's computer uses a fascinating architecture, quantum processing cores with redundant biological verification systems. Very different from our binary approach, but the tactical databases are starting to translate. Carter's enthusiasm was barely contained. Colonel, your carrier operations manuals alone are revolutionizing how we think about the Prometheus deployment. We were planning to use it as a mobile weapons platform, essentially a flying gun emplacement. But your doctrine suggests using it as a fighter carrier with the capital ship serving as mobile support and logistics hub. That's what carriers do, Blair said. You don't send the Prometheus into direct combat if you can avoid it, it's too valuable, too difficult to replace. You use it to project force through fighter wings that can engage targets, gather intelligence, and withdraw before enemy capital ships can respond. The carrier stays at standoff distance, managing operations and ready to recover fighters. Which requires a lot more fighters than we currently have. O'Neill had entered the bay quietly, accompanied by a massive figure who could only be TLC. The Jaffa stood easily 2 meters tall, the gold emblem on his forehead marking him as former First Prime. His bearing radiated controlled power and tactical awareness. Colonel Blair, O'Neill said, meet TLC. TLC, this is the pilot from another dimension who's been making our fighter jocks cry in the simulator. I have heard of your training methods, Colonel Blair. TLC's voice was deep, measured. Major Mitchell speaks highly of your instruction, despite the significant casualties his simulated squadron has suffered. Blair stood and offered his hand. TLC's grip was firm, the handshake of a warrior acknowledging another warrior. I understand you served as First Prime to a System Lord. I'd like to discuss Goa'uld tactical doctrine if you have time. Indeed. I am curious about your experience fighting the Kilrathi. O'Neill has informed me they were an honorable warrior culture. Honor-bound, yes. Whether that made them honorable is debatable. Blair gestured to the tactical display. They followed strict clan hierarchies and combat protocols. Personal glory mattered more than strategic victory, which we eventually learned to exploit. But they were also relentless, brutal, and willing to sacrifice entire fleets if it meant dying with honor. The Jaffa share certain similarities, TLC acknowledged. We are trained to value service to our gods above personal survival. Many Jaffa will fight to the death rather than retreat, believing that death in service ensures passage to the afterlife. Which makes them predictable. Blair pulled up a combat scenario. If I know an enemy won't retreat under any circumstances, I can use that against them. Draw them into killing zones, overextend their formations, create situations where their honor code forces them to make tactically unsound decisions. You speak as one who has fought such enemies. For 10 years. The Kilrathi's honor code cost them the war. They were technologically superior, had greater numbers, and controlled more territory. But they couldn't adapt when we changed tactics, couldn't break from their traditional approach to warfare. Eventually, that rigidity became a fatal weakness. TLC inclined his head. The Free Jaffa are learning this lesson. We must balance our warrior traditions with tactical flexibility if we are to survive against enemies like Anubis who care nothing for honor. Speaking of Anubis, O'Neill interjected, we just got intel from the Tok'ra. He's moved up his timeline. Whatever he's building, it's nearly complete. Jacob Carter, Sam's dad, thinks we're looking at weeks, not months, before he makes his move. Blair felt the familiar pre-combat tension settle into his shoulders. Your F-302 production rate. We have 6 combat-ready fighters, Carter said quietly. Another 8 in various stages of assembly. The Prometheus won't be fully operational for at least 2 months. 6 fighters against a Goa'uld fleet. Blair ran the numbers automatically. What's Anubis's typical force projection? How many ships? His mothership is larger than standard Hatak vessels, TLC reported. Enhanced shields, more powerful weapons. Intelligence suggests he commands at least 30 death gliders as escort, plus support craft. Blair didn't bother hiding his assessment. 6 fighters against 30 gliders and a super mothership. Those are suicide odds. Yeah, we've kind of specialized in those around here. O'Neill's dry humor couldn't quite mask the underlying concern. The question is whether your training can improve our survival chances from 0% to maybe 5%. The question is whether we're using the right tactical approach. Blair studied the display, his mind cycling through carrier doctrine, fleet engagement strategies, lessons from hundreds of combat missions. You're thinking in terms of direct engagement, fighters versus fighters, capital ships trading broadsides. That's how the Goa'uld fight because they've got overwhelming numbers and superior technology. We can't win that fight. So what's the alternative? Carter asked. Asymmetric warfare. Hit and run tactics. Use the Stargate network to our advantage. Strike from unexpected vectors, withdraw before they can concentrate fire, force them to disperse their fleet to defend multiple targets. He gestured to TLC. You said Anubis has support craft. What kind of logistics does a Goa'uld fleet require? Fuel depots, supply ships, maintenance facilities. Goa'uld vessels are largely self-sufficient, TLC said, but they require Naquata for weapons and shields. Anubis has established mining operations on several worlds to support his fleet construction. Then we don't attack his fleet directly. We attack his logistics. Destroy his Naquata shipments, sabotage his mining operations, force him to divert resources to defense. Make his fleet expensive to maintain. Blair's strategic mind was fully engaged now, seeing patterns and possibilities. In the Kilrathi War, we couldn't match their capital ships ton for ton, so we targeted their supply lines. Made it costly for them to operate deep in our territory. Eventually, the economic pressure became unsustainable. O'Neill exchanged glances with Carter and TLC. That's actually not a terrible plan. We've been so focused on preparing for the direct assault on Earth that we haven't considered going on the offensive first. The best defense is making the enemy worry about their own defense. Blair pulled up a star chart, or rather, a gate network map that Carter had shown him earlier. How many of Anubis's mining operations have been identified? The Tok'ra have intelligence on at least 4, Carter said, already pulling up coordinates. P4X 639, M7G 677, P2A 463, and P9C 882. All heavily defended with ground forces and orbital death glider patrols. 4 targets, 6 fighters. Blair ran the tactical math. We'd need to strike simultaneously to prevent him from reinforcing after the first attack. That means splitting our force, 2 fighters per target. Which violates everything you've been teaching us about maintaining numerical superiority, Mitchell said. He'd returned to the bay, apparently drawn by the sound of operational planning. You said never let yourself get outnumbered. In a fair fight, yes. But we're not planning a fair fight. Blair sketched out the engagement profile. 2 fighters gate to orbit above each mining world. They don't engage the gliders, they target the mining equipment, the Naquata storage, whatever infrastructure exists. 30-second attack run, maximum weapons release, then immediate gate withdrawal before the defense can respond. By the time the gliders realize what's happening, you're already gone. A lightning strike, TLC said approvingly. Such tactics would demonstrate that Earth is capable of projecting force across the galaxy, not merely defending our home world. It would also make Anubis very angry, O'Neill pointed out. He's already planning to attack Earth. This gives him extra motivation. He's already motivated, Blair countered. But now you make him worried. He has to commit forces to defend his logistics, which means fewer ships available for his Earth assault. You change the tactical calculus from overwhelming force against isolated target to distributed defense across multiple vulnerable points. Carter was already running simulations on her tablet. If we coordinated the strikes perfectly, all 4 mining operations hit within a 5-minute window, Anubis couldn't reinforce in time. His forces would be scattered. And the propaganda value alone would be significant. The Tok'ra and Free Jaffa would see Earth taking offensive action. It's risky, Mitchell said, but his eyes held the gleam of a fighter pilot being offered an actual mission. 2 fighters per target means no backup if something goes wrong. Everything about this war is risky, Major. Blair's voice carried the weight of too many lost friends. The question is whether we take calculated risks on our terms or wait for the enemy to dictate the engagement. I've fought both kinds of wars. I prefer the first kind. O'Neill studied the tactical layout for a long moment. I'll take it to Hammond. If he approves, we'll need detailed mission planning, coordination with the Tok'ra for intelligence updates, and probably a dozen other things I haven't thought of yet. He looked at Blair. You realize if this works, you're going to be stuck here permanently as our tactical consultant. Hammond will never let you leave. If it works, Colonel, I won't want to leave. Blair gestured to the simulator bay, where Mitchell's squadron was beginning to filter back in for the next training session. These pilots deserve a fighting chance. That's what I can give them. Indeed, TLC said, the single word carrying layers of approval. As the planning session expanded into detailed operational discussions, Christopher Blair felt the familiar pre-mission focus settle over him. Different universe, different enemy, different technology. But the fundamental truth remained unchanged. War was war. And someone had to teach these defenders how to win it. In orbit above Earth, the Prometheus continued its construction, unaware that its tactical doctrine was being revolutionized. Across the galaxy, Anubis's mining operations hummed with activity, equally unaware that they'd just become priority targets. And in Cheyenne Mountain, a fighter pilot from another reality prepared to prove that experience fighting one alien empire was exactly the right qualification for fighting another. The Stargate waited, ready to carry warriors to distant battlefields. And this time, Earth would be bringing the fight to the enemy's doorstep. General Hammond stood in the briefing room, studying the tactical proposal with the expression of a man who'd seen too many desperate plans become necessary operations. Blair, Carter, O'Neill, TLC, and Mitchell waited while the general reviewed the mission parameters for the third time. For simultaneous strikes, Hammond said finally. 8 pilots total, half our operational F-302 force, targeting Anubis's logistics infrastructure across 4 separate worlds. He looked up. Colonel Blair, you've been on Earth for 5 days. You're asking me to commit our space combat assets to an offensive operation based on tactical doctrine from a universe we can't verify exists. Yes, sir. Blair didn't flinch from the assessment. Because waiting for Anubis to dictate terms of engagement means fighting the war he wants, not the war we can win. Every day we delay gives him time to consolidate his forces and strengthen his position. Every mining operation we leave intact provides resources for the fleet he's building to attack Earth. The Tok'ra have confirmed the intelligence, Carter added. Jacob, my father, personally verified 3 of the 4 target locations. Mining operations heavily defended but vulnerable to fast strike tactics. If we move quickly, before Anubis realizes we're capable of coordinated offensive operations, we can inflict significant material damage. Hammond turned to O'Neill. Colonel. It's aggressive, risky, and probably going to piss off a half-ascended madman with a god complex. O'Neill paused. But Blair's right about the strategic logic. We've been reactive since day 1. Dial the gate, see what's trying to kill us this week, fight our way home. This puts us on the offensive. Shows the system lords that Earth can project force. TLC. The Free Jaffa would view such action favorably, TLC said. It demonstrates that the Tauri are worthy allies, not merely defenders of a single world. Many Jaffa still question whether Earth possesses the strength to challenge the Goa'uld. A successful strike against Anubis's resources would silence such doubts. Hammond's gaze settled on Mitchell. Major, you'll be leading one of these strike elements. Do you believe your squadron is ready? Mitchell chose his words carefully. Sir, 3 weeks ago I would have said no. We were flying 302s like they were atmosphere fighters with altitude boosters. Colonel Blair's training has fundamentally changed how we approach space combat. We're not experts yet, but we understand 3-dimensional tactical thinking. We understand coordinated strikes. And we understand that sometimes the best defense is making the enemy defend themselves. He paused. My pilots are ready for this mission, sir. The general was silent for nearly 30 seconds. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of command decisions that could save or doom civilizations. I'll authorize the operation with the following conditions. First, Colonel Blair will participate in mission planning but will not fly combat. His fighter is non-operational and we cannot risk losing his tactical expertise in the field. Blair opened his mouth to protest, but Hammond raised a hand. Second condition, Major Carter will coordinate with the Tok'ra to provide real-time intelligence updates during the operation. Any indication that Anubis has reinforced the targets and we abort immediately. Third, you will have 12 hours to finalize mission planning and run full tactical simulations. If the simulations show unacceptable casualty projections, we scrub the mission. Understood, sir, Blair said, accepting the logic even if he disliked being grounded. We'll have mission packages ready for your review by 0800 tomorrow. See that you do. Dismissed. The team filed out of the briefing room. O'Neill caught Blair's arm in the corridor. I know you want to fly this one. I've planned hundreds of strike missions, Colonel. I've never sent pilots into combat I wasn't willing to fly myself. Different universe, different rules. Hammond's right. You're more valuable as a tactical consultant than as an extra fighter in the formation. O'Neill's expression softened slightly. Besides, Mitchell's squadron needs someone in the command center who understands what they're doing out there. Someone who can make real-time tactical adjustments if things go sideways. Blair knew O'Neill was right, but the knowledge didn't make it easier. In the Kilrathi War, I lost count of how many friends died while I was safe in a command center or back on the carrier. Never gets easier, watching people execute plans you wrote. No, O'Neill agreed quietly. It doesn't. But that's the job. They walked in silence toward the elevator that would take them to the deeper levels where the F-302 hangars waited. Carter had already disappeared into her lab, coordinating with Jacob Carter through the Tok'ra communication crystals. TLC had gone to brief Bratak and the Free Jaffa leadership, ensuring that word of Earth's offensive capability spread through the right channels. Which left Blair, Mitchell, and Mitchell's squadron 12 hours to transform a strategic concept into an executable tactical plan. The mission planning session stretched into early morning. Blair had commandeered a conference room and covered every available wall surface with tactical displays, engagement timelines, and contingency protocols. Mitchell's squadron, now expanded to include the pilots who would fly the strike missions, absorbed information with the focused intensity of warriors who knew their survival depended on getting details right. Target Alpha, P4X-639, Blair highlighted the first mining world on the display. Tok'ra intelligence indicates 15 Jaffa ground forces, mining equipment processing approximately 200 kilos of refined naquata per day, and orbital patrol of 4 death gliders on rotating schedule. Strike element will be Boomer and Viper. Your ingress vector is polar. Gate arrival puts you in high orbit over the northern pole. Orbital mechanics give you a 12-minute window before the glider patrol rotates into intercept position. Mitchell studied the approach trajectory. We come in fast, target the refining facility with rail guns, follow up with missiles on the storage depot, then immediate egress back through the gate before the gliders realize what hit them. Exactly. Time on target, 90 seconds maximum. Any longer and you risk getting caught in a dogfight you can't win. Blair moved to the next display. Target Bravo, M7G, 677. Heavier defenses. 20 plus Jaffa, larger mining operation, 6 death gliders on patrol. Nomad and Shadow, you're taking this one. The challenge here is the glider patrol pattern. They're staggered, which means at least 2 will have visual on your ingress regardless of approach vector. Shadow, a quiet pilot named Sarah Chen, no relation to the Lieutenant Chen who died weeks earlier, traced the orbital patterns with her finger. So we accept that will be detected. Plan for it. Come in hot, weapons free on arrival, prioritize the mining equipment over the gliders. Correct. Your mission is infrastructure destruction, not fighter combat. If the gliders engage, you evade and continue toward the primary target. They'll expect you to dogfight, that's Goa'uld tactical doctrine. When you ignore them and hit the mining facility instead, you create confusion. Use that confusion to complete your strike and withdraw. Nomad, Captain James Rivers, the squadron's senior pilot after Mitchell, looked skeptical. Every instinct says you don't ignore enemy fighters on your 6. Every instinct that got you killed in 38 simulator runs, Blair countered without malice. In atmosphere, you're right, you can't ignore threats behind you because they can maintain pursuit indefinitely. In space, if you maintain velocity and use evasive maneuvering, a pursuing fighter has to match your vector or lose the intercept solution. And while they're chasing you, you're heading toward your target. You've turned their pursuit into your approach run. That's... Rivers paused, processing the tactical logic. That's actually brilliant. That's experience. The Kilrathi used similar pursuit tactics. We learned to treat enemy fighters as obstacles to navigate around, not opponents to engage unless absolutely necessary. Blair moved to the third target. Target Charlie, P2A-463. This one's different. Minimal ground forces, only 2 death gliders, but the mining operation is inside a canyon system. Joker and Havoc, you're taking this. The challenge isn't the defenses, it's the terrain. Joker, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, grinned. Finally, something where atmospheric flight experience actually helps. Canyon flying, terrain masking, map of the Earth approach. Don't get cocky, Blair warned. The canyon walls limit your maneuvering options. If those gliders get into the canyon with you, it becomes a knife fight in a phone booth. Your advantage is that you'll see the mining equipment before they see you. Come in low, follow the canyon floor, weapons release as soon as you have targeting solution, then vertical climb out of the canyon before the gliders can respond. Understood. In and out before they know we're there. Target Delta, P9C-882. Blair highlighted the fourth and final objective. This is the big one. Major mining installation, possibly 30 Jaffa ground forces, 8 death gliders, and intelligence suggests Anubis has stationed a modified Al-Kesh bomber as command and control platform. Ghost and Reaper, you're our most experienced element after Boomer, which is why you're getting the hardest target. Ghost, Major Sarah Park, studied the tactical layout with professional calm. The Al-Kesh is the wild card. If it's equipped with standard sensors, it'll detect our gate arrival and coordinate glider intercept before we reach the target. Which is why you're not going for the mining equipment first, Blair said. Your primary target is the Al-Kesh. Take it out and you blind their coordination. The gliders become 8 individual fighters instead of a coordinated patrol. Much easier to evade. Reaper, Captain David Torres, traced approach vectors on the display. We'll need perfect timing. Gate arrival to Al-Kesh intercept has to be under 3 minutes or they'll scramble the full glider complement. 2 minutes 40 seconds is our simulation average, Blair confirmed. You come through the gate, immediately acquire the Al-Kesh on sensors, full burn toward intercept, weapons release at maximum rail gun range. The Al-Kesh has shields but they're configured for ground support, not fighter defense. Your rail guns should penetrate. Follow up with missiles if necessary, then break toward the mining facility for secondary target engagement. Carter entered the conference room carrying a data pad and coffee that looked like it had been brewing since the previous day. Tok'ra update. Jacob confirms all 4 targets are still operational with force dispositions matching intelligence estimates. However, he's picked up increased communications traffic between Anubis's forces. Nothing specific, but it suggests Anubis is planning something. How long before he moves? O'Neill asked, appearing behind Carter with his own coffee. Jacob estimates 2 weeks, possibly less. Whatever Anubis is building, it's close to operational. Blair looked at the assembled pilots. Which means this strike needs to happen now. We hit his logistics before he launches whatever superweapon or fleet action he's planning. Make him worry about defending his infrastructure instead of focusing on Earth. Simulation time, Mitchell announced, checking his watch. We've got 8 hours to run these scenarios until we can execute them blindfolded. The pilots filed toward the simulator bay. Blair watched them go, seeing echoes of 100 similar pre-mission briefings from the Kilrathi War. Different faces, different universe, but the same determined professionalism. These were warriors preparing to risk everything on a plan that looked good on tactical displays but would face the brutal chaos of actual combat. O'Neill stood beside him. You did good work with them. They did the work. I just showed them how to think differently. Blair gestured to the tactical displays. Question is whether it's enough. Never is, O'Neill said quietly. But it's what we've got. At 0730 the next morning, Blair stood in General Hammond's office and delivered the final mission briefing. The simulations had run 23 times. Casualty projections ranged from 0 losses in the best scenarios to 50% in the worst. The average sat at 1 to 2 fighters lost, acceptable by military standards, devastating by the reality that Earth only had 6 operational F-302s. Hammond listened to the entire presentation without interruption. When Blair finished, the general studied the tactical displays for a long moment. These pilots are ready, he asked finally. They're as ready as training can make them, sir. The rest comes down to execution and 1,000 variables no simulation can predict. Colonel O'Neill, Major Carter, your assessments. The tactical plan is sound, Carter said. We verified Tok'ra intelligence, coordinated timing to ensure simultaneous strikes, and programmed fallback positions if any element encounters unexpected resistance. The F-302s are mechanically sound, weapons are loaded, and we have gate addresses locked for all 4 targets plus emergency backup coordinates. I think it's crazy, O'Neill said bluntly. I also think it's exactly the kind of crazy that might actually work. And I know that sitting here waiting for Anubis to attack is even crazier. So yeah, I'm greenlighting this from a tactical perspective. Hammond nodded slowly. Very well. Mission is authorized. Launch time is 1,400 hours. Colonel Blair, you'll coordinate from the command center. Colonel O'Neill, you'll have SG-1 on standby for emergency gate extraction if any element gets stranded. Major Carter, maintain Tok'ra communication throughout the operation. He stood, signaling the meeting's end. And God help us all if this goes wrong. 6 hours later, Blair stood in the SGC command center watching 8 F-302 pilots climb into their cockpits. Mitchell's voice came through the comm channel, calm and professional despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. Command, this is Strike Lead. All elements report ready for launch. Blair keyed the microphone, speaking to pilots who were about to execute a plan he'd written. Strike Lead, this is Tactical Control. You have authorization for mission execution. Remember your training. Trust your wingmen. And come home safe. Copy, Tactical. Strike elements, this is Lead. Execute on my mark in 3, 2, 1, mark. The Stargate activated 4 times in rapid succession, each chevron lock sending another pair of fighters through to distant worlds. And Christopher Blair, grounded in a universe not his own, watched young pilots carry his tactical doctrine into combat and prayed that his experience would be enough to bring them home alive. The command center fell into the controlled tension that defined combat operations. Blair stood at the tactical display, watching 4 separate mission timelines unfold simultaneously. Carter monitored Tok'ra communication channels. O'Neill paced behind them, maintaining the appearance of casual observation while his eyes tracked every data point. Hammond observed from his position overlooking the gate room, the weight of command settling visibly on his shoulders. Strike Alpha through the gate, the technician announced. Chevron 7 locked, wormhole established to P4X639. On the display, 2 blue icons representing Mitchell and Viper's fighters materialized in orbit above the target world. Blair watched their vectors adjust, following the polar approach exactly as planned. 15 seconds to weapons range. The mining facility would be visible on their sensors now, Jaffa ground forces unaware that death approached from high orbit. Strike Bravo away, another technician called. P2A-463, gate connection confirmed. Nomad and Shadow's icons appeared on their tactical display. Blair noted with approval that Shadow had immediately begun evasive maneuvers. The Death Glider patrol was reacting faster than intelligence had suggested. Good. Let them react. As long as the fighters maintained course toward the mining equipment, the glider's response was irrelevant. Strike Charlie dialing, the gate technician continued. M7G677, establishing connection. Joker and Havoc's fighters transitioned through the gate into the canyon world. Their approach trajectory looked good. Low altitude, terrain masking, exactly the knife-edge flying that would keep them hidden until weapons release. Strike Delta, the technician paused. Sir, we're getting interference on the P9C882 connection. Gate is establishing but there's unusual energy fluctuation. Blair's tactical instincts screamed warning. Can Ghost and Reaper abort? Negative, they're already committed to the wormhole. Carter's fingers flew across her console. The energy signature. It's similar to what we saw when Anubis deployed ancient technology. He might have some kind of detection grid around that planet. Get them on comm the second they emerge, Blair ordered. They need to know the Alkesh might have advance warning. Ghost and Reaper's icons appeared on the display, but their positioning was wrong. They'd emerged from the gate at a different vector than planned, the energy fluctuation throwing off their arrival coordinates by several thousand kilometers. Strike Delta to command, Ghost's voice came through tight with controlled urgency. We've got a problem. Gate arrival put us off vector and the Alkesh is already scrambling gliders. We're looking at 8 contacts launching from the surface, not in patrol positions. Command copies, Blair responded, mind racing through tactical options. Stay with the mission. You're farther from the target but you've got speed advantage on launch. The Alkesh is still your primary. Take it out and those gliders lose coordination. Roger, command. Engaging primary target. Blair forced himself to compartmentalize. Ghost and Reaper's situation was critical but the other 3 elements were still executing their strikes. On the Alpha display, Mitchell and Viper had reached weapons range. Strike Alpha, weapons free, Mitchell's voice was Arctic calm. Engaging mining facility now. The tactical display showed railgun fire streaking toward the surface installation. Good hits. Mining equipment spiking thermal readings as refined Naquata storage detonated under kinetic impact. The Death Glider patrol was reacting, breaking from their route, but they were still 8 minutes from intercept position. Secondary targets eliminated, Viper reported. Strike Alpha is Winchester on rail guns, switching to missiles for final pass. Negative, Blair cut in. You've achieved mission objectives. Break off and return to gate. Don't waste ordnance on damaged targets. Copy, command. Strike Alpha breaking off, heading for extraction point. 1 element successfully withdrawing. Blair shifted attention to Strike Bravo's display. Nomad and Shadow had reached their target but the situation had deteriorated, for Death Gliders had somehow gotten ahead of their approach, forcing the F-302s into exactly the kind of engagement Blair had warned against. Strike Bravo, command. Report status. We're engaged, command. Shadow's voice was strained. For gliders between us and the target. We're trying to break through but they're coordinating intercept vectors. They knew we were coming. Impossible. The strikes had been planned to achieve complete tactical surprise. Unless. Major Carter, check Tok'ra channels. Are there any reports of increased Goa'uld activity across the target worlds? Carter's expression darkened as she reviewed incoming data. Jacobs reporting unusual communications traffic between all 4 target systems in the last 30 minutes. It's like, they were put on alert. Someone warned them, O'Neill growled. We've got a leak somewhere. Blair didn't have time to worry about intelligence failures. On the display, Shadow's fighter was taking hits, shields holding but degrading under sustained staff cannon fire. Strike Bravo, this is command. Mission priorities have changed. Your primary objective is now survival and extraction. Break contact and return to the gate immediately. What about the mining facility? Nomad demanded. Forget the facility. You're facing coordinated defenses with advance warning. The tactical equation just changed, get out of there now. There was a pause. Then Nomad's voice came back, filled with the kind of cold determination that marked veteran pilots making hard calls. Negative, command. We're already committed. Shadow, on my mark, execute Sierra 7 maneuver. Blair recognized the designation, one of the advanced tactics they drilled in simulation. 2 fighters separated by 3-dimensional vectors, forcing pursuing enemies to split their focus, then converging on the target from opposite directions. Risky, required perfect timing, and if either pilot missed their mark the other would be exposed to concentrated fire. Shadow copies. Executing Sierra 7. On the tactical display, the two F-302 icons diverged sharply. The Death Gliders attempted to maintain pursuit on both contacts, their formation fracturing as Blair had predicted. Nomad's fighter swung wide, using maximum thrust to build separation, while Shadow performed a brutal deceleration and flip maneuver that would have torn apart an atmospheric fighter but worked perfectly in vacuum. The gliders committed to pursuing Nomad, recognizing him as the greater immediate threat. Which left Shadow with 30 seconds of clear approach to the mining facility. Weapons free, Shadow announced, and her rail gun stitched destruction across the target. Secondary explosions rippled outward as Naquadah storage went critical. Target destroyed. Braking for extraction. Boomer's clear of his target zone, Mitchell reported from Strike Alpha. Viper and I are holding at the gate, ready for emergency support if anyone needs it. Negative, Strike Alpha. Return through the gate. We don't risk additional fighters on compromised missions. Blair kept his voice level despite the tactical picture deteriorating across multiple fronts. Strike Charlie, report. Charlie here, Joker responded, breathing hard. We had to abort the canyon approach, there were gliders waiting in the canyon. Someone definitely warned them. We're going with Plan B, high-altitude strike instead of terrain-masked approach. Execute at your discretion, Blair authorized. But if the defensive fire gets too heavy, you abort and extract. Strike Charlie's icons climbed on the display, trading stealth for speed. Havoc and Joker were pushing their fighters to maximum velocity, trying to reach weapons range before the Death Gliders below could gain altitude advantage. Contact in 10 seconds, Havoc called. Gliders are climbing to intercept but they're too slow. We're going to thread the needle. Their rail guns opened up at maximum range, not optimal accuracy but sufficient to hit a stationary ground target. The mining facility took damage, though not the catastrophic destruction that Alpha had achieved. Good enough. Against alerted defenses, mission kills were acceptable outcomes. Charlie is Winchester and braking for extraction, Joker reported. 2 gliders in pursuit but they're not gaining. Which left Strike Delta, and their situation had gone from bad to critical. Command, this is Ghost. Her voice was tight but professional, the tone of a pilot dealing with multiple emergencies simultaneously. We engaged the Al-Kesh but it had shields we weren't expecting, ancient enhanced, not standard Goa'uld. Our rail guns barely scratched it and now we've got 8 gliders converging on our position. Recommend we abort the mission. Blair's tactical mind processed the information instantly. Ancient enhanced shields meant Anubis had prioritized this facility with his best defensive technology. Which meant this mining operation was more important than intelligence had suggested, possibly his primary Naquadah source for whatever superweapon he was building. The smart play was to abort. 2 fighters against 8 gliders and a heavy bomber with ancient shields, those were suicide odds even for experienced pilots. But if they withdrew, Anubis would know Earth had attempted coordinated strikes against his logistics. He'd reinforce every facility, making future operations impossible. And the most critical target would remain operational, feeding resources into whatever nightmare he was constructing. Blair made the call every tactical coordinator dreaded. Strike Delta, Command. Can you maintain engagement long enough for support to arrive? Depends on your definition of maintain. Ghost's dry humor couldn't quite mask the sound of proximity alarms screaming in the background. We can stay alive for maybe 3 minutes if we go purely evasive. Actually accomplishing the mission. That's going to require a miracle or reinforcements. Strike Alpha, tactical control. Blair was already running calculations. What's your fuel and weapons status? Mitchell responded immediately, understanding the implication. Alpha is at 60% fuel, full missile loadout still available. Viper and I can gate to Delta's coordinates and provide support. Negative. O'Neill stepped forward. Colonel Blair, we don't risk 4 fighters on a compromised mission. Ghost and Reaper abort and extract, that's an order. Blair met O'Neill's eyes. Colonel, that mining facility is Anubis's primary Naquata source. If we destroy it, we set his timeline back by weeks, maybe months. That's the difference between Earth being ready when he attacks or facing an enemy at full strength. It's also the difference between losing 2 pilots or potentially losing 4. O'Neill's voice was hard. We don't compound bad situations with worse decisions. It's my call, Ghost cut in. And I'm saying we can hold for 3 minutes. If Strike Alpha can get here and help us take down that Al-Kesh, we'll have a fighting chance to complete the mission. If not, we extract and accept that we tried. Hammond's voice came through from his observation position. Colonel Blair, you're the tactical coordinator. This is your call. But understand, if we lose those pilots, it's on your recommendation. Every commander's nightmare. Send pilots into danger based on strategic calculations that looked rational on displays but would mean families receiving notification of deaths if the math was wrong. Blair had made this call dozens of times during the Kilrathi War. Had been right more often than wrong. But the times he'd been wrong still haunted him. He looked at the tactical displays. Strike Alpha was fueled and armed. Strike Delta was holding against overwhelming odds, but they were professional pilots who knew their capabilities. 3 minutes for Alpha to gate through and arrive at Delta's position. Another 2 minutes to engage the Al-Kesh with coordinated fire. 5 minutes total. Could Ghost and Reaper survive 5 minutes against 8 death gliders? In simulation, the answer was no. But simulation didn't account for pilot skill, determination, or the unpredictable chaos of combat. Strike Alpha, proceed to strike Delta's coordinates and provide fire support, Blair ordered. All elements, this is now a coordinated assault on target Delta. Ghost and Reaper maintain evasive protocols, draw the gliders away from the mining facility. Alpha arrives, engages the Al-Kesh with full missile payload. Once that bomber is down, all 4 fighters converge on the mining target and sanitize it completely. Execute. Alpha copies, proceeding to Delta coordinates. Mitchell's voice carried absolute confidence. Viper and I will crash that party and make it even odds. Ghost copies. Reaper and I will keep these gliders busy. Just don't take too long, our shields are getting pretty thin. Blair watched the tactical displays as Mitchell and Viper's fighters returned through the gate at P4X 639 and immediately dialed a new connection to P9C 882. 30 seconds in wormhole transit. Then they'd emerge into a furball that would test everything he'd taught them. Carter looked up from her console. Colonel, Jacobs reporting that Anubis himself has been notified of the attacks. He's not happy. Good, Blair said grimly. Let him be unhappy. Let him worry about defending his infrastructure instead of planning his Earth assault. That's the whole point. On the display, Strike Alpha's icons materialized in orbit above the 4th target world. And the real battle began. Mitchell and Viper emerged from the gate into chaos. Contact, contact. Viper's warning came instantly. I've got 8 gliders in visual range, for breaking toward us, for still pursuing Ghost and Reaper. Command, Strike Alpha has arrived at the party, Mitchell reported, his voice carrying the controlled aggression of a fighter pilot entering combat. Acquiring the Al-Kesh now. Viper, you're with me on the bomber. We ignore the gliders unless they force engagement. Blair watched the tactical display as Mitchell executed exactly the doctrine he'd taught, prioritize mission objectives over target opportunities. The Al-Kesh represented the strategic threat, the command and control node coordinating Goa'uld defenses. Take it down and the remaining forces became disorganized fighters instead of a coherent defense. Ghost, Reaper, Strike Alpha is engaging primary target, Blair transmitted. Continue evasive maneuvers and draw gliders away from our attack vector. Copy, Command. Ghost's breathing was labored, she'd been pulling high-G evasive maneuvers for nearly 4 minutes. We're heading toward the planet's terminator line. Maybe the gliders will have trouble with targeting in the shadow zone. Smart thinking. Even in space combat, light and shadow could provide tactical advantages when sensor systems struggled with rapid environmental transitions. On the Alpha display, Mitchell and Viper approached the Alkesh from divergent vectors. Another drill they'd practiced dozens of times. The Goa'uld bomber was maneuvering now, its pilot aware that the tactical situation had shifted from hunting 2 fighters to defending against 4. Missile lock achieved, Mitchell announced. Fox 1, Fox 1. 2 missiles streaked from Mitchell's fighter. The Alkesh's shields flared bright blue, ancient enhanced technology absorbing impacts that would have crippled a standard Goa'uld vessel. But the shields weren't invincible. They were weakening under sustained fire. Vipers engaging with rail guns, Viper reported. Concentrating fire on shield impact points. I'm seeing fluctuations in the shield matrix. Keep hitting it, Blair ordered. Ancient shields regenerate but they need processing time. Sustained fire will overwhelm the regeneration cycle. The Alkesh was returning fire now, staff cannon blasts that Mitchell and Viper evaded with practiced precision. This wasn't the desperate scrambling of rookie pilots but the calculated maneuvering of warriors who'd internalized three-dimensional combat dynamics. Carter suddenly tensed at her station. Colonel Blair, I'm picking up something on long-range sensors. Energy spike consistent with hyperspace window opening. Distance and trajectory. 40,000 kilometers and closing. She looked up, face pale. It's a Hatak. A mothership just dropped out of hyperspace. The command center fell silent. Every tactical calculation Blair had made suddenly became irrelevant. A Goa'uld mothership, hundreds of times larger than fighters, armed with weapons that could vaporize F-302s with a single hit, carrying dozens of death gliders in its bays. Identification? Hammond demanded. Unknown configuration, Carter reported. But the energy signature matches Anubis's known fleet elements. He sent a capital ship to defend this facility. O'Neill swore. That's how important this mining operation is to him. He's willing to commit a mothership to protect it. Blair's mind raced through options. Withdrawal was the obvious choice, for fighters couldn't fight a mothership. But withdrawal meant leaving the facility intact, meant Anubis would know Earth had attempted offensive operations and failed. Every future strike would face reinforced defenses and accelerated response times. Strike Alpha, Command, Blair transmitted. Be advised, Hatak-class mothership has just entered the battle space. Time to intercept your position approximately 7 minutes. Copy that. Mitchell's voice remained steady despite the news that a capital ship was bearing down on them. We're committed to the Alkesh engagement. If we break off now, those gliders will pursue and the mothership will have clear targeting solutions on our retreat. Better to finish this fight and extract before the Hatak gets into weapons range. Agreed, Blair said, though his tactical instincts screamed at the escalating risk. All strike elements, new mission timeline. You have 6 minutes to destroy primary targets and extract. After 6 minutes, that mothership will be in firing position and nothing I teach you will help against capital ship weapons. On Ghost and Reaper's display, the 2 fighters had managed to draw their pursuing gliders into the planet's shadow zone. The death gliders were struggling with targeting, exactly as Ghost had predicted, but they were persistent, continuing pursuit despite reduced sensor effectiveness. Reaper, I've got an idea, Ghost transmitted. These gliders are following us on predictable pursuit vectors. What if we flip the script? I'm listening, Reaper responded. We've been running evasive for 5 minutes. They think we're trying to survive until backup arrives. What if we suddenly reverse and engage? Use their own pursuit vectors against them? Blair recognized the tactic immediately. It was a variant of a maneuver called the barrel roll reversal in Confederation doctrine. High risk because it meant flying directly toward pursuers who had weapons locked, but if executed with perfect timing, it could turn hunted into hunter. "Command, do we have authorization for Ghost's plan?" Reaper asked. Every instinct told Blair to order them to maintain evasive protocols. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and now a mothership was entering the battle space. Taking unnecessary risks was madness. But Ghost and Reaper had been holding against 8 gliders for 6 minutes with no losses. They knew their capabilities, knew their fighters, and most importantly, they'd adapted to three-dimensional combat thinking faster than any pilots Blair had trained. "Authorized," he said. "Execute at your discretion." On the display, Ghost and Reaper's fighters suddenly decelerated and reversed vector in a perfectly synchronized maneuver. The pursuing Death gliders, expecting continued evasion, suddenly found themselves flying directly into the F-302's weapons range. Rail guns opened up at point-blank range. 2 gliders disintegrated immediately, their shields overwhelmed by concentrated fire at distances where energy dissipation was negligible. A third took critical damage and began tumbling out of control. Splash 3 gliders. Ghost's voice carried fierce satisfaction. "Remaining contacts are breaking formation, they're confused." "Don't pursue," Blair warned. "You've equalized the odds. Now get clear and head for the mining facility. Strike Alpha needs support on that Al-Kesh." "Copy," proceeding to Alpha's position. At the Al-Kesh engagement, Mitchell and Viper had maintained sustained fire for 90 seconds. The ancient enhanced shields were failing, visible gaps appearing in the protective matrix where rail gun impacts were reaching the bomber's hull. "Shields at 20%, Carter reported, monitoring the energy readings. "One more sustained burst should collapse them completely." "Viper, concentrate all remaining rail gun ammunition on my target lock," Mitchell ordered. "We end this now." Both F-302s released everything they had. Rail gun rounds tore through the weakened shields and punched into the Al-Kesh's hull. Secondary explosions rippled across the bomber's surface as internal systems catastrophically failed. "Target destroyed." Viper confirmed. "The Al-Kesh is breaking apart. Strike Delta, this is command." Blair allowed himself a moment of satisfaction despite the mothership closing on their position. Primary target eliminated. All fighters converge on mining facility and sanitize it. You have 4 minutes until the HOTAC enters weapons range. Ghost and Reaper arrived at the facility first, their earlier engagement having positioned them closest to the ground target. Their missiles streaked downward, impacting mining equipment and Nequada storage with devastating effect. Mitchell and Viper followed seconds later, adding their remaining ordnance to the destruction. The mining facility disappeared in a series of overlapping explosions that registered on sensors as a minor seismic event. Refined Nequada burning with the intensity of a small star. Equipment worth millions in gold resources reduced to molten slag. "Mission complete," Ghost reported. "Target Delta is thoroughly destroyed. All fighters are Winchester, weapons expenditure 100%. "Then get out of there," O'Neill growled from beside Blair. "That mothership is 3 minutes out." The 4 F-302 icons on the display turned toward the Stargate coordinates, racing against capital ship weapons that could reach them in seconds once the HOTAC achieved firing position. Carter's console flashed red. "The mothership is charging weapons. They've got targeting solutions on our fighters." Blair felt his chest tighten. The fighters were moving at maximum velocity, but space was vast and the Stargate was still 40 seconds away. The HOTAC would fire in 30. "All fighters, emergency evasive protocols," he ordered. "Random vector changes, make yourselves hard targets. Command is dialing the gate now, you just need to survive another 30 seconds. "Easy for you to say," Joker muttered from Strike Charlie, which had been holding at the gate coordinates waiting for Delta's extraction. "You're not being targeted by a pyramid-shaped death machine." The HOTAC fired. Staff cannon blasts big enough to destroy small ships streaked across the display. Mitchell's elements scattered, each fighter breaking on independent vectors as Blair had taught them, never let the enemy predict your next position. Most of the blasts missed. One grazed Reaper's fighter, shields flaring bright as they absorbed partial energy transfer. Reaper's shields at 40%, the pilot reported. Still operational, but I won't survive another hit. 20 seconds to gate activation, the SGC technician called out. Another salvo from the Hatak. This time the Goa'uld gunners had adjusted for the fighter's evasive patterns. A staff cannon blast caught Viper's fighter directly. Viper's shields are down. Viper's voice was strained. I've got hull breaches in 3 sections. Life support is failing. Hold together, Mitchell commanded. Gates opening in 10 seconds. You can make it. Gate activation. The technician's voice cut through the tension. Chevron 7 locked. The wormhole erupted into space at the coordinate strike Delta had used for insertion. Mitchell's fighter dove through immediately, disappearing into the shimmering event horizon. Ghost followed, then Reaper. Viper's damaged fighter was trailing, losing velocity as damaged systems struggled. Come on, O'Neill muttered beside Blair, watching the display as if willpower alone could pull the fighter through. Another salvo from the Hatak. The Goa'uld knew their prey was escaping and fired everything they had. Viper's fighter took a glancing hit that sent it tumbling. The pilot corrected, using emergency thrusters to stabilize his trajectory toward the gate. 5 seconds. 4. 3. The fighter entered the wormhole just as another staff cannon blast passed through the space it had occupied milliseconds earlier. In the SGC gate room, 4F-302 fighters materialized on the ramp, their hulls scorched and shields depleted but intact. Viper's fighter was trailing smoke and sparks, but the pilot was alive. The command center erupted in controlled celebration, technicians allowing themselves brief smiles, Carter visibly relaxing, O'Neill nodding with satisfaction. Hammond's voice cut through the relief. All fighters accounted for. Affirmative, sir, Blair reported. Strike Charlie, Joker and Havoc remained at gate coordinates and extracted without incident. Strikes Alpha, Bravo, and Delta all achieved mission objectives with varying degrees of success. All pilots survived, one fighter with significant damage requiring repair. Tok'ra are reporting on all channels, Carter added, reading incoming data. 4 of Anubis's mining operations were hit simultaneously. Naquadah production has been severely disrupted. The system lords are impressed. They didn't think Earth had the capability for coordinated offensive operations. More importantly, TLC said, entering the command center, Anubis is reportedly furious. He has recalled ships from 3 contested territories to reinforce his remaining logistics infrastructure. The Free Jaffa have been gifted an opportunity to strike at System Lord holdings while Goa'uld forces are diverted. Blair watched the tactical displays power down, mission complete. They'd achieved the strategic objective, disrupted Anubis's timeline, forced him onto the defensive, demonstrated Earth's offensive capability. The cost had been 1 heavily damaged fighter and 8 pilots pushed to their absolute limits. In the Kilrathi War, that would have counted as an overwhelming success. Colonel Blair. Hammond descended from his observation position. Impressive work. Your tactical coordination kept casualties to 0 despite significant intelligence failures and unexpected enemy reinforcements. The pilots executed flawlessly, sir. They adapted to changing circumstances and made the right calls under pressure. Blair paused. But we need to discuss the intelligence leak. Someone warned those facilities we were coming. That's the only explanation for coordinated defensive preparation across 4 separate worlds. Already being investigated, O'Neill said grimly. The Tok'ra are running internal security checks. We're reviewing our own communications. Someone with access to mission planning either deliberately or accidentally compromised operational security. In the hangar bay, Mitchell's squadron was climbing out of their fighters, exhausted but victorious. Blair watched through the observation window as they embraced, celebrated survival, and began the post-mission ritual of checking their aircraft for damage. These were veterans now. They'd flown combat against a superior enemy and survived through skill, teamwork, and tactical doctrine that Blair had helped them internalize. They'd proven that Earth could project force across the galaxy, that humanity's nascent space combat capability wasn't just defensive but operational. And somewhere across the galaxy, Anubis was learning that Earth wasn't waiting to be attacked. They were bringing the fight to him. The war had changed. And Colonel Christopher Blair, fighter pilot from another universe, had just taught Earth's defenders their first lesson in offensive space warfare. The post-mission debriefing stretched into the early hours of morning. Mitchell's squadron sat around the briefing table, flight suits still damp with sweat, faces showing the peculiar mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline that followed combat. Blair stood at the head of the table, reviewing combat footage frame by frame, pointing out both successes and near-fatal mistakes. Nomad, freeze frame here. Blair highlighted the moment where Strike Bravo had executed the Sierra 7 maneuver. This is what saved your lives. You recognized that the tactical situation had changed, they were waiting for you, and instead of trying to force the original plan, you adapted. That's the difference between experienced pilots and dead ones. Felt like we were making it up as we went, Shadow admitted. You were. That's combat. Blair advanced the footage to Mitchell's Alkesh engagement. Strike Alpha, your approach was textbook. You identified the strategic target, maintained focus despite glider harassment, and concentrated fire until shields failed. But, he paused the video. Mitchell, you came within 800 meters of that bomber when it exploded. That's too close. Debris from a destroyed capital ship can be as dangerous as weapons fire. Noted, Mitchell said. In the moment, I was focused on maintaining firing solution. Which is correct. But add debris radius to your tactical calculations. Blair moved to Ghost and Reaper's engagement. Strike Delta, your reversal maneuver was brilliant and risky in equal measure. You turned a defensive retreat into an offensive strike by exploiting enemy assumptions about your capabilities. Ghost, where did you learn that tactic? Honestly? I didn't. It just seemed like the logical thing to do. Ghost looked uncomfortable with the attention. We'd been running for 6 minutes. They were getting predictable in their pursuit. Reversing gave us initiative. That's tactical intuition, Blair said. You can't teach it in simulators. It comes from understanding the battlefield so thoroughly that you see opportunities others miss. You took a calculated risk and it paid off. But, he met her eyes. If your timing had been off by 2 seconds, those gliders would have shredded you at point-blank range. Risk assessment needs to factor in consequence of failure, not just probability of success. Understood, sir. Blair closed the tactical display. Overall assessment. This mission was a success despite significant complications. You achieved all primary objectives, adapted to compromised intelligence, and extracted with 0 casualties against numerically superior forces. That's exemplary performance. He paused. But we got lucky. Viper's fighter took damage that could have been catastrophic. If that Hatak had arrived 5 minutes earlier, we'd be having a very different conversation. Luck isn't tactics. We need to be better. Better how? Reaper asked. We executed everything you taught us. You executed well. But execution isn't enough against an enemy like Anubis. He's learning from this engagement just like we are. Next time, he'll have reinforcements staged closer. Next time, he'll have better early warning systems. Next time, he won't let us achieve surprise. Blair leaned forward. We need to be innovating faster than he's adapting. That means new tactics, better coordination with allied forces, and integration of technology we haven't fully exploited yet. Carter entered the briefing room carrying a data pad and looking like she'd been awake for 30 hours straight. "Colonel Blair, I've finished preliminary analysis of the combat data. You're going to want to see this." She pulled up sensor readings from the HOTAC engagement. That mothership that arrived at Target Delta. It wasn't just any Goa'uld vessel. It's one of Anubis's flagships, enhanced with ancient technology. And according to Tok'ra intelligence, Anubis was aboard. The room fell silent. "We fought Anubis directly?" Mitchell's voice was quiet. "Not directly, you engaged forces under his immediate command. But yes, he was close enough to observe the battle personally." Carter highlighted energy signatures. "Which means he now has first-hand combat data on our F-302 capabilities, our tactics, and our operational doctrine. He's seen how we fight." O'Neill entered behind Carter. "And apparently he's not taking it well. The Tok'ra are reporting that Anubis has recalled additional ships from frontline positions. He's consolidating his fleet for what Jacob thinks is a major operation. Timeline unknown, but the activity level suggests weeks, not months. He's accelerating his Earth assault schedule," Blair said immediately. "We disrupted his logistics, forced him to defend infrastructure, and demonstrated offensive capability. From his perspective, Earth just became a strategic threat instead of a target of opportunity. He's going to hit us before we can launch more strikes." "That was the risk," Hammond said, entering the briefing room. "By going on the offensive, we've provoked a response. The question is whether we're ready for what's coming." Blair studied the tactical data, his mind running through strategic scenarios. "General, what's the status of the Prometheus?" 6 weeks from operational capability at current construction pace, Carter reported. "We could push it to 4 weeks if we prioritize combat systems over secondary functions, but it would still be incomplete." "And F-302 production?" O'Neill's dry assessment hung in the air. "Anyone else feeling outgunned?" "We've been outgunned since day one," Mitchell countered. "Hasn't stopped us yet." "Major's right," Blair said. "Raw numbers don't determine victory, tactics and coordination do. The Kilrathi had us outgunned throughout most of the war. We survived by fighting smarter, exploiting weaknesses, and using assets in ways the enemy didn't anticipate." "What assets?" O'Neill asked. "We've pretty much thrown everything we have at this problem." Blair turned to TLC, who had been observing silently. "You said the Free Jaffa have an opportunity while Anubis's forces are diverted. What's their combat readiness?" "The Free Jaffa possess multiple HOTAC vessels captured from system lords," TLC replied. "We have trained warriors numbering in the thousands. However, coordination between different Jaffa factions remains problematic. Many clans still prioritize traditional rivalries over unified action. What if Earth provided tactical coordination?" Blair proposed. "Your warriors have the ships and combat experience. We have strategic planning capabilities and integration with Tok'ra intelligence. Combined operations, Jaffa capital ships providing heavy firepower while our fighters provide precision strike capability." Carter's eyes lit up. "We've never attempted large-scale coordination with allied forces. It's always been SG teams operating independently or small-scale cooperation. But if we could integrate Free Jaffa vessels with our space combat doctrine, we'd have a fleet," Mitchell finished. "Not just fighters and an incomplete carrier, but actual capital ship support. The Free Jaffa would need assurance that Earth respects their sovereignty," TLC cautioned. "Many Jaffa are suspicious of Tauri intentions, believing you seek to replace the Goa'uld as dominant power in the galaxy." "Then we prove otherwise," Hammond said decisively. "Colonel Blair, work with TLC to develop a joint operations framework. Major Carter, coordinate with Jacob and the Tok'ra. I want intelligence sharing protocols that give us real-time updates on Anubis's fleet movements. Colonel O'Neill, SG-1 has handled more first contact and diplomatic missions than anyone, you'll be our liaison to the Free Jaffa leadership. Me? Diplomatic? O'Neill looked pained. Sir, you know I'm terrible at diplomacy. You're terrible at diplomatic protocol, Hammond corrected. But you're excellent at building trust with warriors who respect straight talk and demonstrated competence. The Jaffa will respond to that. Blair was already sketching tactical formations on the display. If we coordinate with even 3 or 4 Hatak vessels, we can establish overlapping defensive positions around Earth. Ancient orbital weapons platform in Antarctica provides close-in defense. Hataks establish a picket line at the system's edge. Our fighters serve as rapid response and strike elements. When Anubis arrives, he won't be facing an isolated planet, he'll be facing a coordinated defense with multiple force elements. There's another asset we haven't discussed, Carter said hesitantly. The ancient outpost in Antarctica. We've barely scratched the surface of its capabilities. If we could fully activate its defensive systems. Requires someone with a strong ancient gene or the willingness to use a repository of knowledge, O'Neill interjected quickly. I've done the repository download twice. Trust me, it's not something you want to experience. Nearly killed me both times. There might be another option, Carter continued. Colonel Blair's fighter has technology we've never seen before. His quantum processing cores, his propulsion systems. What if some of his technology is compatible with ancient systems? What if we could integrate his fighter's computer architecture with the outpost's control systems? Blair considered the implications. His Excalibur's computer contained tactical databases from the entire Kilrathi War, strategies, battle formations, weapons profiles, everything the Confederation had learned through decades of conflict. If that knowledge could interface with ancient defensive systems. It's worth exploring, he said. But we're talking about integrating technology from 3 different universes, mine, yours, and the ancients. The engineering challenges alone could take months. We don't have months, O'Neill reminded them. Then we prioritize, Hammond decided. Major Carter, you lead the technical integration effort. Colonel Blair, continue training our pilots while working with TLC on joint operations planning. We're going to need every advantage we can create in the next few weeks. The briefing broke up, pilots heading to quarters for desperately needed rest, command staff dispersing to various urgent tasks. Blair remained in the briefing room, studying tactical displays and running combat simulations in his mind. TLC approached quietly. You carry the weight of command with familiar burden, Colonel Blair. I recognize the expression of one who has sent warriors into battle. 10 years fighting the Kilrathi, Blair said. Started as a rookie pilot, ended as a squadron commander. Lost a lot of friends along the way. You learn to carry the weight, but it never gets lighter. Indeed. I have led Jaffa into battle for over a century. The faces of the fallen remain clear in my memory. TLC paused. Your training has given our pilots a chance at survival they would not otherwise possess. That is a commander's greatest gift to those who serve. Survival isn't enough. We need victory. Victory is a luxury of those who survive long enough to achieve it. TLC's wisdom carried the weight of experience. Your pilots survived their first true combat. They will fight again, with greater confidence and skill. That is how warriors are forged. Blair nodded slowly. Tell me about the Free Jaffa command structure. If we're going to coordinate fleet operations, I need to understand who makes decisions and how quickly they can respond to tactical changes. For the next 2 hours, TLC provided detailed briefing on Jaffa military organization, clan politics, and the complex relationship between warriors who'd spent their lives serving false gods and now struggled to forge independent identity. Blair absorbed it all, seeing parallels to the Kilrathi honor structure, recognizing exploitable patterns in how warrior cultures organize themselves. By the time they finished, he had the framework for a joint operations doctrine that might actually work, if the Jaffa trusted Earth enough to follow it, if the technology integration succeeded, if Anubis gave them enough time to prepare. Too many ifs. But that was war. You planned with the assets available, prepared for the worst-case scenario, and hoped that when the battle came, your training and tactics would be enough. Carter found him in the hangar bay hours later, reviewing damage to Viper's fighter. You should sleep, Colonel. You've been awake for 36 hours. So have you, he pointed out. Yes, but I'm running on coffee and scientific curiosity. You're running on pure stubbornness. She smiled. I've been analyzing your fighter's systems. The quantum processing cores are fascinating. They don't just calculate outcomes, they evaluate probability matrices across multiple decision branches simultaneously. It's like they're thinking through tactical scenarios the way a human would, but at computational speeds. Confederation AI research, Blair explained. We learned early in the Kilrathi War that pure computational power wasn't enough for combat systems. You need intuition, pattern recognition, the ability to make decisions with incomplete information. So we developed processors that mimicked human tactical thinking. Which is exactly what ancient technology does, but through completely different mechanisms. Carter's excitement was palpable. If I can create a translation interface, something that lets your tactical databases communicate with ancient control systems, we might be able to upload combat doctrine directly into the Antarctic Outpost's defensive network. You're talking about teaching ancient weapons systems how to fight like Confederation pilots fought. Exactly. Those drone weapons the ancients developed. They're incredibly powerful, but they've been dormant for millennia. With proper tactical programming, they could engage Goa'uld ships using proven combat strategies instead of whatever default parameters the ancients originally programmed. Blair studied his damaged fighter, seeing it with new perspective. It wasn't just a museum piece from another universe. It was a repository of hard-won knowledge that might tip the balance in a war he'd inadvertently joined. How long until you know if it's possible? Give me 72 hours. If the interface works, we'll have the most advanced defensive system in the galaxy backed by some of the most effective combat doctrine ever developed. If it doesn't, she shrugged. We'll still have the outpost. It just won't be as smart. Make it work, Major. Because when Anubis comes, we're going to need every advantage we can create. Carter headed back to her lab, already muttering calculations. Blair remained in the hangar, alone with his fighter and his thoughts. Somewhere across the galaxy, Anubis was preparing his assault. Somewhere in Earth's orbit, the Prometheus took shape. And somewhere in the future, days or weeks away, a battle would be fought that would determine whether humanity survived as an independent force in galactic affairs or fell to the same parasitic false gods who'd enslaved countless worlds. Colonel Christopher Blair, veteran of one interstellar war, prepared to fight another. And this time, he had allies, resources, and warriors who'd proven they could learn quickly enough to survive. The question was whether quick would be enough. 3 weeks after the coordinated strikes on Anubis's mining operations, Blair stood in a hangar bay that had been converted into a command center for joint operations planning. Holographic displays showed fleet positions, gate network maps, and real-time intelligence feeds from Tok'ra operatives scattered across the galaxy. Around the central table stood representatives of 3 distinct forces that had never before attempted coordinated military action. Bratak, the legendary Jaffa master who had trained TLC, commanded respect simply by his presence. The ancient warrior's scarred face and steady gaze spoke of a century of combat experience. Beside him stood Ragnar, commander of the Free Jaffa vessel Talmak, and 2 other Jaffa ship captains whose clans had agreed to Earth's proposed alliance. Jacob Carter represented the Tok'ra, his dual nature as both Sam's father and host to the symbiote Selmak, providing unique perspective on both human and Goa'uld strategic thinking. And representing Earth, Hammond, O'Neill, Carter, TLC, Mitchell, and Blair himself, the outsider who'd somehow become the architect of humanity's first coordinated fleet defense. The intelligence is clear, Jacob said, his voice shifting between human and Tok'ra tones as Selmak contributed analysis. Anubis has assembled 15 Hatak motherships at a staging point in the Kaulana system. 12 are standard system Lord vessels he's commandeered or conquered. 3 are enhanced with ancient technology, shields, weapons, and power systems far beyond conventional Goa'uld capabilities. Blair studied the fleet composition on the display. 15 motherships translates to approximately 200 death gliders total, plus support craft. Against our defensive force of. He gestured to the Allied fleet summary. For free Jaffa Hataks, Bratak rumbled. Each carrying 30 Jaffa warriors trained in ship-to-ship combat. Our vessels are captured system Lord ships, functional but not enhanced beyond standard Goa'uld specifications. The Prometheus, Carter added, is now combat-ready at 85% completion. We've prioritized shield systems, main weapons batteries, and hangar facilities. Secondary systems are still incomplete, but she can fight. And 16 F-302 fighters, Mitchell concluded. We've cannibalized parts from incomplete units to field 4 full squadrons. My pilots have been training non-stop in joint operations protocols that Colonel Blair developed. The tactical imbalance was stark. 15 Goa'uld motherships versus 4 Jaffa ships, 1 incomplete Earth carrier, and 16 fighters. On paper, it was suicide. The ancient outpost in Antarctica, O'Neill said. That's our ace. Those drone weapons can take out motherships, we've seen it before when Anubis first attacked. The outpost has limitations, Carter cautioned. Power requirements are massive. We can generate maybe a dozen drone salvos before the ancient power source depletes to critical levels. And someone needs to be in the control chair to direct them, someone with the ancient gene. I'll do it, O'Neill said immediately. I've sat in that chair before. Nearly got myself killed, but it worked. Blair had been studying the tactical layout since the intelligence briefing began. Something about Anubis's force composition bothered him, a pattern he recognized from Kilrathi operations but couldn't quite articulate. Jacob, what's Anubis's timeline for attack? Tok'ra operatives report his fleet will depart Kaulana in 72 hours. Transit time to Earth via hyperspace is approximately 6 hours. So we're looking at attack in 4 days, give or take. And his approach vector? Unknown. He could emerge from hyperspace anywhere in Earth's system. Standard Goa'uld doctrine would be to arrive at the edge of the system and advance on the planet, but Anubis rarely follows standard doctrine. That's what bothers me, Blair said. 15 motherships is overwhelming force for attacking a single planet. The Kilrathi would have sent half that number and kept the rest in reserve for follow-up operations or defending against counterattacks. Anubis is committing everything to this assault. Perhaps he seeks to ensure victory through overwhelming power, Ragnar suggested. Or he's planning something beyond simple planetary assault. Blair highlighted the 3 ancient enhanced vessels on the display. These ships, they're the key. Standard system Lord vessels we can fight with proper tactics. But ancient enhanced shields and weapons change the equation. What if those 3 ships aren't meant for ship-to-ship combat? Carter's eyes widened. The Antarctic outpost. If Anubis knows about it, and he probably does, given his ancient knowledge, he'd want to neutralize it before attacking Earth proper. Those 3 enhanced ships could potentially withstand the drone weapons long enough to reach the outpost. And if the outpost is destroyed, Bratak said gravely, Earth loses its most powerful defensive weapon. Blair nodded. So we're not facing a single battle. We're facing a coordinated assault with multiple objectives. Neutralize the ancient outpost, overwhelm Earth's fleet, and conquer the planet. Anubis is thinking strategically, not just tactically. How do we counter it? Hammond asked. Blair pulled up a 3-dimensional tactical display of Earth's solar system. We split our defensive forces into 3 elements. Element 1, the Antarctic outpost with Colonel O'Neill in the control chair. That's our strategic deterrent, but it's also vulnerable to direct assault. Element 2. The Prometheus and 2 Jaffa Hattacks positioned in near-Earth orbit. They defend the planet itself and serve as rapid response if Anubis's fleet approaches from unexpected vectors. Element 3, 2 Jaffa Hattacks NRF, 302 squadrons positioned at the system's edge as an advanced picket line. You're spreading our forces thin, Jacob observed. I'm forcing Anubis to split his attention, Blair corrected. If all our forces concentrate at Earth, he can focus his entire fleet on overwhelming us. But if we have credible threats at multiple positions, he has to allocate resources to deal with each element. That's when numerical superiority becomes a weakness, too many ships to coordinate, too many objectives to prioritize. Mitchell was already running calculations on his tablet. The F-302 squadrons at the system's edge, what's our objective? We can't fight 15 motherships. You're not there to fight. You're there to gather intelligence and harass. Blair highlighted approach vectors on the display. When Anubis's fleet emerges from hyperspace, you report composition, positioning, and attack vectors. Then you conduct hit-and-run strikes on his rear elements, not to destroy them, but to force him to commit defensive resources. Every death glider he sends after you is one less attacking Earth. A delaying action, TLC said approvingly. Force the enemy to deploy forces defending against threats that cannot achieve strategic victory, thereby weakening their primary assault. Exactly. And while the fighters keep his fleet distracted, the Prometheus and Jaffa vessels in Earth orbit prepare to engage whatever elements break through. If those 3 ancient enhanced ships head for Antarctica as I suspect, the Antarctic outpost concentrates drone fire on them exclusively. We don't waste drones on standard Hattacks. We save them for the ships that can actually survive drone strikes. Carter was already modeling the tactical scenario on her computer. It could work. The coordination requirements are extreme. We'd need real-time communication between all elements, instant tactical updates, and the ability to respond to changes within seconds. But mathematically, it gives us better survival odds than concentrating forces. What are our survival odds? O'Neill asked bluntly. Carter hesitated. Concentrated defense, approximately 15% chance of successfully repelling Anubis's assault. Distributed defense using Colonel Blair's doctrine. 38%. Still terrible odds, Hammond observed. Better than 15%, Blair countered. And odds change during combat. If we execute well, create unexpected complications for Anubis, and exploit opportunities as they arise, we can shift those probabilities in our favor. Bratak studied the tactical display with the eye of a warrior who'd fought more battles than anyone in the room. Your plan requires trust between forces who have never coordinated fleet operations. It requires Jaffa commanders to follow tactical directions from Tauri who possess little experience in capital ship warfare. It requires your fighter pilots to face overwhelming odds with no hope of direct victory. Yes, Blair said simply. It requires all of that. The question is whether it's possible. The old Jaffa's scarred face split into a fierce grin. I have waited a century to see the free Jaffa stand as equals with allies against our former gods. If the Tauri are willing to risk everything defending their world, then we are willing to trust your tactical wisdom. He placed his hand over his heart in Jaffa salute. The Talmak and Cormac will take position at your system's edge. Our warriors will follow your fighter squadrons into battle. Ragnar and the other Jaffa captains echoed the salute. For the free Jaffa. For Earth. Against Anubis. The Tok'ra will provide real-time intelligence, Jacob added. We have operatives tracking Anubis's fleet. The moment they enter hyperspace, you'll know. And we're positioning assets to harass his supply lines and communications. It won't stop him, but it might create additional confusion. Hammond looked around the command center, at warriors from 3 different species, united by common cause against a threat that endangered them all. Then we have a plan. Colonel Blair, you'll coordinate tactical operations from Prometheus Command Center. You'll have direct communication with all fleet elements and authority to make real-time tactical adjustments. Sir, I should point out I've never commanded capital ship operations, Blair said. My experience is fighter squadron coordination. Which is exactly what we need, Hammond countered. This battle will be won or lost by coordination, not by individual ship capabilities. You've proven you understand how to integrate multiple force elements into coherent tactical operations. That's the skill we need. I'll assist with capital ship tactical recommendations, Jacob offered. Between Selmac's knowledge of Goa'uld fleet doctrine and your fighter coordination expertise, we'll cover both aspects of the battle. O'Neill clapped Blair on the shoulder. Congratulations, Colonel. You just got promoted from consultant to fleet coordinator. Try not to get us all killed. I'll do my best, Blair said dryly. The meeting continued for another 3 hours, drilling down into communication protocols, engagement rules, emergency fallback positions, and a dozen other tactical details that could mean the difference between coordinated defense and chaotic disaster. Mitchell's squadron leaders participated via video link, absorbing their roles in the larger battle plan. When the planning session finally ended, Blair found himself alone in the command center, staring at the holographic display showing Earth's solar system. In 4 days, that peaceful display would transform into a battlefield. 15 Goa'uld motherships against a desperate alliance. Hundreds of lives depending on tactical decisions he'd make in split seconds while chaos erupted across three-dimensional space. He'd commanded carriers in the Kilrathi War, coordinated strikes across multiple systems, fought battles where the survival of humanity hung in the balance. But those had been against an enemy whose tactics he understood, whose capabilities were known, whose strategic goals were predictable. Anubis was half-ascended, possessed ancient knowledge, and commanded technology that shouldn't exist. He'd proven himself capable of strategic thinking beyond typical Goa'uld megalomania. And he was bringing 15 motherships to crush a planet that had repeatedly defied him. Second-guessing the plan? Carter's voice came from the doorway. Running contingencies, Blair replied. In combat, plans rarely survive first contact. I'm trying to anticipate what breaks and how we adapt. She walked to the display, studying the tactical layout. Watched friends die, saw worlds burn, fought battles we had no business winning. The Kilrathi were stronger, more numerous, and absolutely committed to humanity's destruction. We survived by being smarter, more adaptable, and refusing to accept that overwhelming odds meant inevitable defeat. And you won. Blair was quiet for a moment. We survived. Victory and survival aren't always the same thing. But survival gives you the chance to eventually achieve victory. That's what I'm trying to give Earth, the chance to survive long enough to win. Carter studied him with scientific curiosity mixed with genuine concern. You never talk about going home. About finding a way back to your universe. Because right now, it's not relevant. Blair gestured to the tactical display. In 4 days, Anubis attacks. Whatever brought me here, whatever quantum anomaly or dimensional rift or ancient device, it can wait. These pilots, this alliance, this battle, that's what matters now. And after? After, we'll see if I'm still alive to worry about it. He turned from the display. You should get some rest, Major. We've got 4 days to finalize coordination, run joint tactical drills, and prepare for the largest fleet engagement Earth has ever fought. You'll need to be sharp. So will you, she pointed out. I'll sleep when I know the battle plan won't get everyone killed. Blair pulled up communications protocols, already identifying potential failure points in the coordination network. Go. I've got work to do. Carter left reluctantly, recognizing the expression of a commander who wouldn't rest until every detail was perfect, knowing that perfection was impossible but refusing to accept anything less. Alone in the command center, Christopher Blair prepared for war. For days until Anubis arrived. For days to transform a desperate plan into executable doctrine. For days to teach 3 different military forces how to fight as one. In the Kilrathi War, he'd learned that impossible odds were just numbers on a screen until the battle began. Then they became opportunities to prove that tactical brilliance, coordination, and warrior spirit could overcome raw power. Anubis was about to learn the same lesson. If they survived long enough to teach it. 72 hours later, Blair stood in the Prometheus command center as klaxons blared across all defensive positions. The holographic tactical display erupted with contacts, 15 hyperspace windows opening simultaneously at the edge of Earth's solar system, exactly where his contingency models had predicted Anubis would emerge. All stations, this is tactical control, Blair transmitted across the Joint Operations Network. Anubis's fleet has arrived. Confirm sensor contacts and report readiness status. Strike lead confirms 15 HOTAC signatures. Mitchell's voice came through from his F-302, positioned with the advanced picket force. Composition matches intelligence estimates, 12 standard system Lord vessels, 3 with enhanced energy signatures consistent with ancient technology. They're holding position at system's edge, probably scanning for defensive deployments. Prometheus reports combat ready, the Prometheus tactical officer announced. Shields at maximum, weapons charged, Asgard sensors tracking all hostile contacts. Free Jaffa vessel Talmak standing by, Bratak's voice carried the calm of a warrior who'd faced impossible odds countless times. Our weapons are prepared, our warriors eager to strike against the false god. Antarctic outpost online, O'Neill transmitted from the ancient control chair deep beneath Earth's ice. I've got the chair interface active and those drone things are ready to fly. Just point me at what needs killing. Blair studied the tactical display, watching Anubis's fleet remain stationary for nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in combat terms. The Goa'uld commander was assessing the situation, analyzing defensive positions, calculating approach vectors. He's surprised, Jacob observed from his station on the Prometheus. Selmak says Goa'uld doctrine doesn't anticipate coordinated defensive positions. Anubis expected to face isolated resistance, not an integrated fleet. Good. Let him stay surprised. Blair highlighted the 3 ancient enhanced motherships on the display. Those 3 vessels are maintaining central position in his formation. He's protecting them, which confirms our assessment. They're his primary strike force, probably intended for the Antarctic assault. The Goa'uld fleet began moving, advancing into the solar system in a formation that Blair recognized from his tactical databases. Standard pincer approach. The main force advancing directly while flanking elements spread wide to envelop defensive positions. Textbook capital ship tactics designed to overwhelm through superior numbers and firepower. All elements, maintain positions, Blair ordered. Do not engage until they commit to their approach vectors. We need to see his full tactical deployment before we react. Mitchell's squadron held position at the system's edge, their F-302 fighters dwarfed by the massive Goa'uld motherships passing within weapons range. The temptation to engage had to be overwhelming, but the pilots maintained discipline, letting the enemy fleet advance while gathering critical intelligence. Strike lead to tactical control, Mitchell reported. Getting detailed scans on the 3 enhanced vessels. Their shield configurations are definitely ancient-derived. Multi-layered, adaptive frequency modulation. Standard weapons fire would be mostly ineffective. Confirmed, Carter added from her sensor station. Those shields will absorb everything except sustained drone strikes or concentrated fire from multiple capital ships. We were right, they're configured to assault the Antarctic outpost. Anubis's fleet continued its advance, crossing the orbit of Neptune. The formation was beginning to separate. 8 standard motherships forming the main assault element aimed directly at Earth, for more spreading wide in flanking positions, and the 3 ancient enhanced vessels maintaining central position with heavy death glider escort. There's your tactical deployment, Jacob said. Main force to engage our fleet, flankers to prevent escape or reinforcement, and the enhanced ships protected in the center until they're ready to strike the outpost. Blair had seen this pattern before, not from the Goa'uld, but from the Kilrathi. Overwhelming force with a protected strategic element. The solution was the same: disrupt the coordination, force the enemy to react to unexpected threats, and create opportunities by making their strengths into weaknesses. Strike squadrons, you're authorized for harassment operations, Blair commanded. Target the flanking elements, not to destroy, but to force them to commit defensive resources. Make Anubis split his death glider coverage. Strike lead copies, Mitchell responded. All squadrons, break by elements and engage flanking motherships. Remember your doctrine, hit and run, don't get drawn into sustained dogfights. On the tactical display, 16 F-302 icons scattered into 4 fighter elements, each targeting one of the flanking motherships. Railgun fire and missiles streaked across the display as Earth's fighters executed the tactics Blair had drilled into them: high-speed attack runs, weapons release at maximum range, immediate evasive maneuvers before death glider response could coordinate. The Goa'uld fleet's formation wavered. Death gliders launched from the flanking motherships, abandoning their central protective positions to chase the F-302s. Exactly as Blair had predicted. It's working, Carter observed. He's deploying at least 60 gliders to counter the fighter strikes. That's 60 fewer protecting his enhanced vessels. Prometheus and Jaffa fleet, advance to engagement range, Blair ordered. Target the main assault force. We need to pull his attention forward, make him commit the enhanced vessels prematurely. The Prometheus surged forward, its Asgard-enhanced engines driving the capital ship toward the approaching Goa'uld main force. The 2 free Jaffa Hattacks followed in supporting positions, their weapons charging as they prepared for ship-to-ship combat at a scale Earth forces had never attempted. Prometheus firing, the tactical officer announced. Railgun batteries and energy weapons lanced out across thousands of kilometers, impacting Goa'uld shields with devastating force. The lead system Lord vessel staggered under the impact, shields fluctuating as they struggled to dissipate the concentrated energy. Bra'tak's Talmak and Ragnor's Cormac added their firepower, staff cannon batteries targeting a second mothership in the Goa'uld formation. The coordinated fire was something the system lords had never faced, free Jaffa using captured vessels with the tactical precision of warriors fighting for freedom rather than slave soldiers following orders. Goa'uld fleet is returning fire, Carter reported. Multiple motherships targeting Prometheus. Shields holding at 85%. Blair watched the tactical dance unfold. The Goa'uld main force was engaging his capital ships exactly as planned, committing resources to the direct confrontation. The flanking elements were distracted by F-302 harassment. Which meant the 3 ancient enhanced vessels were now the most vulnerable they'd be during the entire engagement. Colonel O'Neill, you have 3 enhanced motherships at coordinates Delta 79er. They're attempting to break from the main formation and vector toward your position. Engage with drones, full authorization. Finally, O'Neill's voice carried grim satisfaction. Launching drones now. Through the ancient outpost sensors, Blair watched as dozens of golden energy drones erupted from Antarctica's ice, accelerating to impossible velocities as they streaked toward orbit. The ancient weapons were things of terrible beauty. Guided by O'Neill's mental interface, they maneuvered with precision no conventional missile could match. The first salvo struck the lead enhanced mothership. O'Neill reported. But those shields are tough. I'm burning through drone reserves faster than I'd like. Keep firing, Blair ordered. Those 3 ships are Anubis's strategic strike force. If they reach the outpost, we lose our most powerful defensive weapon. The remaining 2 enhanced vessels were reacting now, deploying additional death gliders and attempting evasive maneuvers. But ancient drones were relentless, adjusting vectors with impossible precision. A second enhanced mothership took multiple hits, its shields finally collapsing under sustained assault. The vessel began breaking apart, explosions rippling across its hull. 2 down, 1 remaining, Carter updated. But the Goa'uld main force is pressing the attack on Prometheus. Our shields are at 60% and we're taking heavy fire from 6 motherships simultaneously. Blair assessed the tactical situation. The enhanced vessels were neutralized. 2 destroyed, 1 retreating under heavy drone fire. But the Prometheus was taking punishment it couldn't sustain indefinitely, and the free Jaffa vessels were similarly pressed. Strike squadrons, break off harassment and converge on the Goa'uld main force, he commanded. Target their rear elements, force them to split attention between capital ships ahead and fighters behind. Mitchell's squadron responded instantly, their fighters breaking from Death Glider pursuits and vectoring toward the concentrated Goa'uld formation. 4 fighter elements coordinated their approaches, executing the complex 3-dimensional maneuvers Blair had drilled into them until they became instinct. Strike Alpha engaging, Mitchell announced. Targeting mothership designated Tango 4. Rail guns firing. The F-302 strikes wouldn't destroy motherships. Fighter-scale weapons lacked the firepower for that. But they didn't need to destroy. They needed to distract, to create tactical uncertainty, to force enemy commanders to make decisions under pressure. A Death Glider pursuing one of Mitchell's wingmen exploded as it flew directly into another glider's line of fire, the kind of fratricide that happened when formations became confused and commanders lost coordination. Goa'uld formation is fragmenting, Jacob reported. Their command structure is breaking down. Individual motherships are making independent tactical decisions instead of coordinating as a fleet. Exactly what we need, Blair said. Prometheus, concentrate fire on the motherships showing tactical confusion. When a commander loses coordination with his fleet, exploit it. The Prometheus's weapons batteries targeted a mothership that had broken formation, attempting to pursue F-302s while simultaneously defending against capital ship fire. The Goa'uld vessel's shields collapsed under the concentrated assault, and the hull began venting atmosphere. Mothership destroyed, the Prometheus tactical officer confirmed. The battle was reaching critical mass, the moment where tactical advantage could shift decisively in either direction. Blair had 8 motherships still operational in the main Goa'uld force, 4 flanking elements being harassed by fighters, and 1 enhanced vessel limping away under drone pursuit. But Prometheus's shields were degrading, the free Jaffa vessels had taken damage, and his fighter squadrons were running low on ammunition after sustained engagement. Tactical control, this is Strike Charlie 3, one of the fighter pilots transmitted urgently. I've got multiple hyperspace windows opening. New contacts emerging, looks like another Goa'uld fleet. Blair's chest tightened. Reinforcements. Anubis had held forces in reserve, waiting to deploy them when Earth's defenses were committed and exhausted. Confirm contact identity and composition, he ordered, already running contingencies for fighting a 2-fleet engagement. There was a pause. Then the pilot's voice came back, filled with confusion and something that might have been hope. Tactical control, new contacts are not Goa'uld. Repeat, not Goa'uld. I'm reading, they're Asgard design signatures. Multiple O'Neill-class vessels emerging from hyperspace. On the tactical display, 5 Asgard warships materialized at the edge of the battlefield, small gray vessels that looked insignificant compared to Goa'uld motherships but carried technology centuries beyond anything the system lords possessed. This is Commander Thor of the Asgard fleet, a familiar voice transmitted across all frequencies. We received your distress signal and have come to assist in Earth's defense. Engaging hostile forces now. Asgard weapons, impossibly advanced beam technology, lanced across space, striking Goa'uld motherships with devastating precision. Shields that had withstood sustained fire from Earth and Jaffa vessels simply ceased to exist under Asgard assault, and the motherships beneath disintegrated in seconds. The Goa'uld fleet, already fragmented and confused, broke entirely. Individual motherships began opening hyperspace windows, retreating from a battle that had turned catastrophically against them. All forces, pursue fleeing elements, Blair ordered. Don't let them escape cleanly. Make Anubis pay for every ship that survives. 302 squadrons and Asgard vessels harried the retreating motherships, destroying 2 more before they could enter hyperspace. The free Jaffa vessels claimed another, Bra'tak's warriors boarding and capturing the vessel in a display of combat ferocity that would become legend. When the last Goa'uld ship disappeared into hyperspace, the tactical display showed 15 contacts reduced to 0. Earth's solar system was clear of hostile forces. The command center erupted in controlled celebration, technicians allowing themselves brief smiles, officers shaking hands, the tension of combat giving way to exhausted relief. All stations, this is General Hammond, the SGC commander's voice cut through the celebration. Secure from combat operations. Damage control teams, begin assessments. Medical, stand by for casualties. And someone get me a casualty and damage report immediately. Blair pulled up the battle statistics. Prometheus had taken heavy damage, shields depleted, hull breaches on 3 decks, weapons systems operating at 60%. The free Jaffa vessels had fared similarly. But miraculously, catastrophically, they'd lost only 2 F-302 fighters in the entire engagement. Pilots who'd gotten caught in crossfire during the chaotic fleet melee. 2 pilots. In a battle against 15 motherships. Blair had seen engagements with better odds produce far worse casualties. Colonel Blair, Thor's image appeared on the main display, the small gray alien's expression unreadable. Your defensive coordination was exemplary. The Asgard monitored the battle and were impressed by Earth's tactical evolution. You have demonstrated that humanity is ready to assume a larger role in galactic affairs. Commander Thor, your timing was impeccable, Blair responded. Though I'm curious why you waited to engage until the battle was nearly decided. The Asgard are prohibited from direct intervention in affairs between lesser races, Thor explained. However, when one of our protected planets is directly attacked, we are authorized to defend. We merely waited to confirm that Anubis's fleet represented an existential threat rather than a political dispute. Which meant Thor had been watching the entire time, ready to intervene if Earth's defense collapsed but willing to let humanity prove itself capable. Blair understood the logic, species who couldn't defend themselves didn't inspire confidence as potential allies. We appreciate the assistance, Commander, Hammond said diplomatically. And we look forward to continuing our alliance. Thor inclined his head. The Asgard will remain in orbit until repairs to your vessels are complete. We have medical technology that may assist with casualties. The transmission ended. Blair looked at the tactical display, now showing friendly green icons instead of hostile red. They'd won. Against overwhelming odds, through coordination, tactical innovation, and the kind of desperate courage that defined warriors across every universe, they'd won. Colonel Blair. O'Neill's voice came through, the man sounding exhausted. Remind me never to sit in that ancient chair again. My head feels like it's been hit with a staff weapon. Noted, Colonel. Return to base for medical evaluation. Already on it. Just wanted to say, that plan of yours. Splitting our forces, coordinating 3 different fleets, using fighters for harassment instead of direct combat. That was either brilliance or insanity, and I'm still not sure which. In my experience, Blair replied, they're usually the same thing. He watched the display as recovery operations began. Damaged fighters returning to Prometheus, free Jaffa vessels coordinating with Asgard medical teams, and Earth's defenders beginning the slow process of standing down from combat readiness. Colonel Christopher Blair, fighter pilot from another universe, had just coordinated Earth's first major fleet engagement. And won. The question was what came next. 2 days after the battle, Blair stood in the Prometheus observation deck, watching Earth rotate slowly beneath the damaged but victorious capital ship. Repair crews swarmed across the hull in EVA suits, patching breaches and restoring systems with the kind of organized chaos that followed every major engagement. Through the viewport, he could see the free Jaffa vessels holding formation nearby, their warriors conducting their own repairs and honoring their fallen in ceremonies Blair had been invited to attend. The door opened behind him. He didn't need to turn to know it was Mitchell. The pilot's footsteps had become familiar over the weeks of intensive training. "Thought I'd find you here," Mitchell said, moving to stand beside him at the viewport. "You've been avoiding the celebration." "I don't celebrate until I've reviewed the after-action reports and identified what we could have done better." Blair gestured to the tablet he'd been studying. "We lost 2 pilots who shouldn't have died. Captain Reynolds flew into a crossfire zone that tactical coordination should have flagged. Lieutenant Zhao's fighter experienced a weapons malfunction that maintenance should have caught during pre-flight checks. You're taking their deaths personally." "I should. I wrote the tactical plan they were executing." Mitchell was quiet for a moment. "In the simulator, you told me that the first 3 months of combat determine whether you become an ace or a casualty. Reynolds and Zhao survived those 3 months. They became aces. They died doing what every fighter pilot knows might happen, fighting against impossible odds to defend something that matters. That's supposed to make it easier?" "No. But it's supposed to help you understand that you didn't kill them. You gave them the best chance possible." Mitchell pulled up his own tablet. "I've been running the tactical simulations with actual battle data. If we'd concentrated our forces like traditional doctrine suggests, projected casualties were 8 to 12 fighters. If we tried to fight without coordination with the Free Jaffa, we'd have lost everything. Your doctrine saved lives, Colonel. A lot of them." Blair knew Mitchell was right, but the knowledge didn't ease the weight. Command meant accepting that you'd make decisions that got people killed, hoping that those decisions saved more lives than they cost. It was a brutal calculus that never became comfortable. "How's Viper?" Blair asked, changing the subject. "Cleared for flight duty. His fighter took another beating, but he brought it home in one piece." "Again?" Mitchell smiled. "He's asking when we start training for the next engagement." "There's always a next engagement." Blair turned from the viewport. Anubis escaped. 5 of his motherships survived and retreated to hyperspace. He'll rebuild, adapt his tactics, and come at Earth again with new strategies. Let him. We'll be ready. The confidence in Mitchell's voice was earned. These pilots had proven themselves in the crucible of fleet combat. They'd adapted to 3-dimensional warfare, executed complex coordination with allied forces, and maintained discipline against overwhelming odds. They were no longer rookies flying experimental fighters. They were veterans of Earth's first space war. "General Hammond wants to see you," Mitchell added. "Something about your official status and future assignment." Hammond's office overlooked the Stargate, the massive ring silent now but ready to activate at a moment's notice. The general stood as Blair entered, gesturing to a chair. "Colonel Blair. How are you adjusting to being a war hero?" "I'm not, sir. I'm a tactical coordinator who got lucky." "You coordinated a defensive operation that defeated a numerically superior force with minimal casualties. You integrated 3 different military traditions into a coherent fighting force. And you did it while operating in a universe you'd been part of for less than a month." Hammond's expression was serious. "That's not luck, Colonel. That's exceptional command ability." Blair waited, knowing Hammond hadn't called him here for compliments. "We need to discuss your status," Hammond continued. "When you arrived, we classified you as a guest under military custody. That's no longer appropriate. You've proven yourself an invaluable asset to Earth's defense, and frankly, we need your expertise going forward. You're offering me a position. I'm offering you command of Earth's Space Combat Operations Division. Formal rank of Colonel in the United States Air Force, with authority over F-302 tactical doctrine, pilot training programs, and coordination with Allied forces. You'd work directly with Major Carter on technology integration and with Colonel O'Neill on strategic planning." Hammond paused. It's a permanent position, Colonel. Not temporary assignment. Permanent. The word carried weight that Blair hadn't fully confronted. For weeks, he'd been operating in crisis mode, training pilots, planning operations, fighting battles. But underneath, some part of him had assumed this was temporary, that eventually he'd find a way back to his own universe, to the Confederation, to the war he'd been fighting before an ancient device pulled him across realities. "What about my fighter?" he asked. "My return to my own universe?" Major Carter has been analyzing the quantum signatures from the event that brought you here. Her assessment is that the dimensional rift was a one-time occurrence, possibly caused by interaction between your jump drive and an ancient transportation device we didn't know existed. Recreating those conditions, Hammond's expression was sympathetic. "It's theoretically possible but would require resources and technology we don't have. It could take years, decades, or might be impossible." Blair had suspected as much. The likelihood of accidentally creating a stable dimensional bridge and then deliberately recreating it was astronomical. He was stranded, cut off from everything he'd known, in a universe fighting its own war against its own alien empire. "I understand, sir. I want to be clear, we're not abandoning research into getting you home. Major Carter will continue investigating options. But in the meantime, Earth needs you. The Goa'uld threat isn't over. Anubis will return, other system lords will see our victory as a challenge, and we're still building our space combat capabilities from the ground up. You have knowledge and experience we desperately need." Blair looked through Hammond's office window at the Stargate, thinking about everything that had happened. He'd arrived as an outsider, a stranger from an impossible origin. He'd trained pilots who reminded him of the young warriors he'd commanded in the Kilrathi War. He'd coordinated a fleet action that proved Earth could stand against galactic powers. He'd found purpose in a universe not his own. And if he was honest with himself, he'd found something else, a cause worth fighting for, allies worth defending, and the familiar weight of command that had defined him for a decade. "What about the pilots?" he asked. Mitchell's squadron, the other F-302 pilots were training. "They'd continue under your command. You've built something remarkable with them, Colonel. The first generation of Earth space combat pilots, trained in doctrine you developed by integrating your experience with our technology. That's a legacy worth continuing." Blair made his decision. "I accept, sir. On one condition. Which is? We expand the program. 16 fighters aren't enough to defend Earth against the next assault. We need full carrier-based operations. Multiple fighter wings, dedicated training facilities, and integration with the Prometheus and whatever capital ships Earth builds next. If I'm going to command Earth space combat operations, I want the authority to build a real space force." Hammond smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. You have authorization to expand the program, subject to resource availability and coordination with our engineering teams. Major Carter will be your primary liaison for technology development. Colonel O'Neill's SG-1 will provide intelligence on emerging threats. And the Free Jaffa have requested you as their primary tactical advisor for joint operations." Bratak asked for me specifically. He said, and I quote, "The Tauri warrior who taught our allies to fight as we do, with courage, cunning, and the wisdom to make the enemy's strength his weakness, is worthy of Jaffa respect. We would stand with him in future battles." Hammond extended his hand. "Welcome to Earth's Defense Force, Colonel Blair. Permanently." Blair shook the general's hand, feeling the weight of command settle onto his shoulders with familiar comfort. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Now get back to work. We've got a space force to build and about 100 other crises that need your attention." Blair found Carter in her lab, surrounded by holographic displays showing his fighter's quantum processing cores interfaced with ancient technology. She looked up as he entered, her expression caught between scientific excitement and exhaustion. "Colonel. I heard about your new assignment. Congratulations. Thanks. How's the integration project coming? Remarkably well, actually. She pulled up a schematic showing data flowing between his Excalibur's computer and the Antarctic outpost's control systems. Your tactical databases are translating into ancient control protocols better than I'd hoped. We're not just uploading combat doctrine, we're teaching ancient defensive systems how to think tactically. The next time someone sits in that control chair, they'll have access to strategic algorithms developed from your entire combat history. So the outpost becomes smarter. Much smarter. And we're applying the same principles to the Prometheus's fire control systems. Imagine having your tactical AI coordinating capital ship weapons with the precision of fighter combat doctrine. Her enthusiasm was infectious. This could revolutionize how we fight. Blair studied the data streams, seeing his 10 years of combat experience being translated into something that would outlast him, that would protect Earth long after he was gone. Legacy took strange forms. There's something else, Carter said, her tone shifting to something more personal. I wanted to thank you. For training our pilots, for coordinating the defense, for caring about whether they survived. A lot of consultants would have just provided doctrine and let us figure out the implementation. You made it personal. It was always personal. The moment I started training them, they became my responsibility. That's what makes you a good commander. She paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying. Earth needs people who understand that technology and tactics aren't enough, you need to care about the warriors using them. Before Blair could respond, his radio crackled. Colonel Blair, this is Strike Lead. We've got a situation in the simulator bay you need to see. Blair and Carter exchanged glances and headed for the simulator facility. When they arrived, they found Mitchell's entire squadron gathered around the main display, which showed a tactical scenario Blair didn't recognize. What's going on? Blair asked. Mitchell grinned. We were running post-battle analysis and started wondering, what if the Kilrathi fought the Goa'uld? Your combat databases have detailed information on their tactics. So we programmed a simulation pitting your old enemies against our new ones. Thought you might want to see how it plays out. On the display, Kilrathi fighters, angular, aggressive designs from Blair's universe. Engaged death gliders in a furball that combined the honor-bound ferocity of feline warriors with the numerical superiority of Goa'uld forces. It was surreal watching two alien species that had never met fighting a simulated battle based on tactical data from different universes. Who's winning? Blair asked. Depends on the scenario, Viper reported from his station. In open space, the Kilrathi's superior individual combat ability gives them the edge. But when we add Goa'uld motherships and their numerical advantage, the system lords overwhelm through attrition. It's actually fascinating from a tactical perspective. Blair watched the simulation, seeing echoes of a war he'd thought he'd left behind. But instead of the weight of old battles, he felt something different, his experience being used as a teaching tool, his knowledge helping new warriors understand different tactical philosophies. Run it again, he said. But this time, add F-302 squadrons fighting alongside the Kilrathi. I want to see how our doctrine integrates with theirs. The pilots eagerly reset the simulation, and Blair found himself analyzing a three-way engagement between species from different universes, all connected by the tactical databases in his fighter's computer. It was absurd and wonderful and exactly the kind of creative thinking that separated good pilots from great ones. O'Neill appeared in the doorway, watching the simulated battle with bemused expression. You know, most people celebrate winning a major fleet engagement by getting drunk or sleeping for 3 days. You guys are running tactical simulations of hypothetical battles between aliens from different universes. We're fighter pilots, sir, Mitchell said without looking away from the display. This is how we celebrate. Fair enough. Blair, when you're done playing with your new toy, Hammond wants you in the briefing room. Apparently, the Tok'ra have intel on Anubis's next move, and we need to start planning our response. Because of course there was already a next crisis. That was the nature of war, you won one battle and immediately began preparing for the next. But looking at these pilots, at their enthusiasm for learning and improving, at the alliance they'd forged with the Free Jaffa and the technology they were developing, Blair realized something important. The Kilrathi War had been about survival. Fighting desperately against an enemy that wanted humanity extinct. This war, this universe's conflict with the Goa'uld, was different. Earth wasn't just surviving. They were building something, a space force, an alliance, a future where humanity stood as equals among the stars. And Colonel Christopher Blair, veteran of one interstellar war, had found his place in another. "All right, people," he said, pulling himself away from the simulation. "Continue the analysis. I want a full tactical breakdown of how our doctrine integrates with different combat philosophies. Mitchell, you're in charge of the training schedule for next week. Viper, coordinate with the Free Jaffa, they've requested joint exercises and I want our pilots learning their capital ship tactics." "Yes, sir," they chorused, already diving back into their work. Blair headed toward the briefing room, Carter falling into step beside him. Through the facility's windows, he could see Earth rotating peacefully, unaware of how close it had come to conquest. The Prometheus held orbit above, damaged but victorious. Free Jaffa vessels stood watch alongside their new allies. And somewhere in the galaxy, Anubis plotted his next move. But Earth was ready now. They had warriors, tactics, and the hard-won knowledge that came from surviving impossible odds. They had allies who'd proven themselves in battle. The Stargate waited in Cheyenne Mountain's depths, ready to connect to thousands of worlds. The war continued across the galaxy, Free Jaffa fighting for freedom, Tok'ra working to undermine the system lords, and Earth defending not just their planet but the principle that humanity deserved a voice among the stars. Colonel Christopher Blair had been pulled from one war into another. But he'd brought with him something invaluable. The knowledge that wars could be won, that impossible odds could be overcome, and that sometimes the best weapon wasn't technology or firepower but warriors who refused to accept defeat. As he entered the briefing room to begin planning the next operation, Blair allowed himself a small smile. Different universe, different enemy, different technology, but the fundamental truth remained unchanged. Wars were won by those who learned faster, adapted better, and never stopped fighting for what mattered. And Earth's defenders were just getting started. The months following Anubis's defeat brought transformation to Earth's space combat capabilities that would have seemed impossible when a fighter from another universe first materialized in orbit. The F-302 program expanded from 16 fighters to 4 full squadrons of 64 operational craft. The Prometheus completed its repairs and upgrades, becoming the flagship of Earth's nascent fleet. And Colonel Christopher Blair's tactical doctrine became required study for every pilot who earned their wings in Earth's defense. But the legacy extended beyond numbers and technology. The Free Jaffa alliance, forged in the desperate hours of fleet combat, evolved into genuine partnership. Bratak's warriors trained alongside Earth pilots, sharing centuries of combat experience while learning the three-dimensional tactics that Blair had brought from the Kilrathi War. The Tok'ra found in Earth a willing ally who could provide military support for their intelligence operations. And the Asgard, impressed by humanity's tactical evolution, began sharing technology they'd previously withheld. Anubis never returned to Earth. The defeat had cost him strategic momentum and credibility among the system lords. But the Goa'uld threat remained. Other false gods rose to challenge Earth's growing influence, testing the defenses that Blair and his pilots had built. Each engagement became a laboratory for tactical innovation, each battle proof that humanity had evolved beyond isolated defenders of a single world. Mitchell's squadron, veterans of Earth's first major fleet action, became the training cadre for new pilots. They taught with the authority of warriors who'd survived the impossible, passing forward the doctrine that Blair had taught them with the same intensity he'd brought to every simulator session. The legacy multiplied. Pilots trained by a warrior from another universe, each generation adding their own experience to the evolving tactical framework. Major Carter's integration of Blair's quantum processing architecture with ancient technology yielded breakthroughs that extended far beyond combat applications. The ability to translate tactical thinking across different technological paradigms opened new fields of research, connecting human innovation with alien science in ways that neither could achieve alone. And in the simulator bays, lecture halls, and ready rooms of Earth's expanding space force, a new generation of warriors learned the fundamental lessons that Colonel Christopher Blair had carried across realities. That numerical superiority could be overcome through tactical innovation, that different species and technologies could be integrated into effective fighting forces, and that sometimes the most valuable asset in war wasn't weapons or shields but warriors who refused to accept that impossible odds meant inevitable defeat. The Stargate network continued connecting worlds, each gate addressed a potential battlefield or alliance. Earth's defenders stood ready. Trained, coordinated, and led by warriors who understood that protecting home meant more than defense. It meant building something worth defending. Colonel Christopher Blair never found a way back to his original universe. The Confederation, the Kilrathi War, the reality he'd known, they remained beyond reach across whatever quantum divide had brought him to Earth. But in the years that followed that first desperate fleet action, he built something equally valuable. A legacy of warriors who knew how to fight, how to adapt, and how to win against enemies that thought humanity too primitive to matter. The Wing Commander had entered a new universe and found a new war. And in fighting it, he'd taught Earth's defenders the most important lesson any warrior could learn, that experience, courage, and tactical brilliance could transform impossible odds into achievable victory. The mission continued. The galaxy held threats uncounted and allies unmet. And somewhere above Earth, fighters bearing the insignia of Colonel Blair's tactical doctrine patrolled the spaceways, ready to prove again that humanity deserved its place among the stars.